Wallace. And didn't you hear this conversation?
I'm the MC. The admin. So we are live. All Yeah.
That would really tick her up.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, wow, we have a really great turnout here today. So we're getting started. We have one more minute before we begin. Just as you know, we're doing a live retreat here. It's wonderful to have everyone here present. And we're also doing, I think the first time ever, a webinar. So we're streaming live what we're presenting today around the world. So we're going to have participants from around the world, and it'll be recorded. So we're really excited about that. We're really excited to have Father Josiah here and do this thing. Well, it's 10 o'clock, so let's begin. First, let's begin with prayer, and then we'll go into it. In the Father, and Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. O heavenly King, the Comforter, the Spirit of truth, who art everywhere present and fearless all things, treasury of blessings and giver of life, come and abide in us, and cleanse us from every impurity, and save our souls, O good one. Amen. Christ is in our midst. So once again, it's wonderful to have everyone here. It's a joy to have you on this nativity retreat being presented by Father Josiah Trenham. And Father, it's wonderful to have you. It's a joy to have you. Welcome you. So my name is Father Andre Paez. I'm the priest here at St. John the Evangelist Orthodox Church in Tempe, Arizona. And we will be having the retreat on behalf of the entire OCA and the Orthodox Church in general for around the world. And this retreat is based on Father's lecture series on the good husband and the good wife, the Christian ideal. And so he'll be the first portion of our seminar will be on the good husband, and then we'll have lunch, and then afterwards we'll be on the good wife. And we'll have Q&A. Also, our webinar participants, please chat your questions, and then we'll bring those questions to Father's attention. And just a few things, if you don't know Father Josiah Trenham, he has author of numerous books and articles. He's also the founder of Patristic Nectar Publications, which is an amazing resource of very spiritually edifying homilies, lectures, resources, audio. So if you haven't been there, please do go there. It's a wonderful, wonderful resource. And Father also has done many, many podcasts on ancient faith under the title The Arena. His homilies are excellent. They're excellent. Further, if you don't know, Father has been a priest in the Antiochian Archdiocese in Riverside, California, and Father Josiah and his flock have built a magnificent temple to the Lord, which took how long to build, Father, your church?
5 years. The church is 24 years old.
Okay.
But the temple itself took 5 years to build.
Okay, so the community is 24 years old, and the temple 5 years to build. It's a magnificent work of art. Father gave us a tour. My wife and I were there, and if you haven't been there to Riverside, California, to see his church, please do so. It is a gem. It is truly, truly a gem. Father also has his beautiful wife and 10 beautiful children, correct? 10? My wife and I, two anecdotes which I'd like to share. When Samantha and I were engaged, the first time we met Father Josiah was at St. Seraphim's Church in Santa Rosa, California, where he was giving a retreat similar to this one. It was a marriage retreat, and Samantha and I asked Father lots of questions. This was 10 years ago. So 10 years ago, and we are indebted to you, Father, for your guidance and for helping us. And so now, after 10 years later, we have 4 children. Our newest child was just born 2 weeks ago, Gabrielle Lucia. So Mama's at home with the baby. Unfortunately, not able to be here, but she sends her love. She sends her love. So we're excited. Father Josiah, if you don't know, has, I think I mentioned, 10 children. So we have a long ways to catch up. Long ways to catch up. The second story, Father is immensely busy. He's always traveling, doing works, putting content together, speaking around the world. My favorite part when I was interacting with him and trying to reach him was our phone tag. One of the things in the midst of phone tag, my favorite thing that Father said was when he called me back, he said, "Forgive me, Father, I just got out of jail." Of course, not on his behalf, he was seeing a parishioner, but that made me tickle as I was laughing. I just got out of jail. Okay, great. So, but he was busy taking care of his flock as a good father and our pastor of his church. So with this, I'd like to welcome you, Father Josiah. Please, so you can begin, and thank you very much.
I'm so tempted to give a homily on jail. And how I probably should be in jail for other reasons like driving too fast and other things. Thank you, Father Andre, for your gracious brotherly welcome. It's a delight to be at St. John Church and to be with you, who are here, I think, to nourish your marriages, and if you aren't married yet, to develop your own beautiful vision for what Christ intends for us in marriage. I also greet those who are watching us from different places in the world, where I guess it's not 10 o'clock in the morning, perhaps even late at night. These are very, very challenging times for married persons in general. Marriage is facing tremendous times. We need to call on God, as I do now. We need to call on God to help us so that we can be true to who we are as Christians, so that we can live in marriages like our forebears have in times when culture supported and recognized the tremendous value of marriage. Unfortunately, we are in the midst of tremendous cultural decay in the West. Deep, deep rot in our culture. And marriage is no longer respected. It's no longer honored. It is falling away, in fact. When I was born, just a half a century ago, the vast majority of homes in our nation, in the United States, were occupied by a husband, a wife, and children. 75%. That's very normative. Today, that percentage is 48%, which means it's a minority. It's no longer the normative way of being in our country, and it's getting worse every year. We have, in that same half-century period, seen all sorts of cultural developments that have worked against the integrity of marriage. We've seen the legalization of adultery, the overthrow of what Justice Scalia, God rest his soul, called morals legislation. such that a person's behavior in marriage is no longer considered by the legal community to be a matter for public law, just a matter of your own personal life. No civilized culture has ever thought such stupid things about marriage. No culture has ever thought that the content, the strength of marriages won't have a direct impact upon the strength of the state. We are launching out into deeply secular waters, and the product of these alterations are really terrible. Not just the legalization of adultery, but in my state, in California, and in many other places now in the United States, the legalization of what's called no-fault divorce or easy divorce. This is a recent horrible development in our land that has led to couples, often in the period of conflict, making a choice for divorce that they have later regretted. We do a lot of things in passion when we're angry or when we're having conflicts that we wouldn't do normally if we had just a little time to think about it. The law used to give us a little time to think about it. The law used to demand that there was a reason for a divorce. No longer in many of the states, and certainly in my home state of California. Now you can dissolve your marriage much quicker than you can dissolve a contract with your pool cleaner. That's how ridiculous it is. We've also seen the radical increase in premarital sex. Of course, you probably know the statistics that those who play married before they're married end up not staying married. Premarital sex is one of the most telltale signs for not having a good marriage. If you want to be happy, want to be happily married, don't take the august, beautiful things of marriage outside of marriage and steal it and pretend. Besides the increase of premarital sex, we see the radical increase in illegitimacy and unwed births. 5% when I was born, half century ago. Today it's over 40%. In some countries in the West, it's 70%. Can you imagine 7 out of 10 children being born without a home in which there's a mother and a father? Tragic. We know, in fact, that in the United States, the key element in poverty is not having the presence of a father. The key element in poverty. So we can't say that the matters that involve intimate matters of marriage don't have public consequences. We know, in fact, that they do. The breakdown of the family is the #1 cause of poverty, and it's also the #1 clear telltale sign of gang involvement. We want to put a cap on the growth of gang violence and the increase in poverty in our country. We have to talk about marriage, and we have to talk about what's necessary to encourage and prop up marriage in our society. I could keep going. Abortion, most recently the ludicrous, culturally arrogant affirmation of same-sex marriage, which no civilization in the history of the human race has ever seen nor dreamed of prior to the year 2000. And now those who promoted it not only think it's obvious, but they think anyone who disagrees with it is a deeply warped bigot. This is how fast culture is changing. A prism through which to see how difficult the times of marriage have fallen upon would be our recent presidential election. There's a lot of differences between the two candidates who were vying for our votes. But one thing that they had in common was a common degradation of marriage, a common deep disrespect for marriage and fidelity in marriage. On the one side, on the Democrat side, we have a politically expedient marriage, absolutely riddled with decades of infidelity and even rape. On the Democrat side, even the #1 counselor for Secretary of State Clinton, who for 20 years has been her guide, is in another political marriage for convenience in which the husband is a serial pedophile and a public nudist. That's on one side. But you go to the other, it's no better. You go to the Republican side, and what do you have? You have a man who's been married 3 times, has cheated on all his wives and boasted about it in print, who has been caught on video boasting about his manipulation of women, even his sexual assault of women. And then when confronted with it, simply passing it off as though it was locker room talk. What do you see on both sides? What you don't see is anything appropriating normal, civilized marriage. Doesn't exist, either side. Tragic, absolutely tragic. So for you to be here, to hear what the church has to suggest is a nourishment for your soul, to have a vision for marriage and to strengthen you in your own marriage. Very wise, extremely wise that you would take this time out of your life to strengthen yourself if you are married, and if you are hoping to be married, to conceive a vision that you can live out. Marriage is holy. Marriage belongs to God. God is the author and the first priest of marriage. When he fashioned Adam and Eve, he himself joined them together. He was the priest of mystical and pure marriage, as we call him in the wedding service. Therefore, to alter and abuse marriage is to do something terribly sacrilegious. To pretend like we can define marriage like it's a wax nose, as though we are the author of marriage, as though marriage was created by some culture here or there. Terrible. Marriage belongs to the Lord. And he has ordained marriage as a way, as a holy path to paradise. Marriage together with monasticism form the 2 paths to heaven. These are the ways, these are the roads that the Lord has fashioned for us to walk down so that we can become what we were meant to be when he created us. I want you to think for a moment about a crazy thought. Imagine that you just became a monk or a nun. Okay? You just became a monk or a nun. Can you imagine you make this decision? The abbot or the hieromonk or the bishop tonsures you. You're a monk, and then the very next day, nothing happens. There's no pattern, there's no development, there's no education, there's no typicon or form. It would be ludicrous to think that you become a monk and then you're just left to go on that way and make it up yourself. In fact, that's not the case, and it would never happen. When you're tonsured a monk, you enter into a very well-trod road, and the older monks teach the younger monks, and the abbot shares with you the tradition, and it involves all sorts of things, from how you pray to what books you read. These are all part of a basic formula that our monasteries keep as part of sacred tradition, because this is the way that monks, those who have been called to the monastic estate, will actually find their salvation and develop their piety and love for God. Now, I know you aren't monks and nuns, but marriage is a path of salvation comparable to monasticism. It's one of the 2 sacred paths that God has ordained. Can you imagine getting married and then having no form, having no pattern, no tradition? I hope you can imagine that, because this is what many people face when they get married. They get married because, well, people get married. Even though I just told you that a lot of them don't these days. I was, just this week, I had a pastoral meeting. A family, a grandmother has been trying to convince me to baptize her grandchild. And this has been going on for a long time. Beautiful grandmother who has great concern because her grandchild is a year old and unbaptized. Very common phenomena in our secularizing society, where the middle generation, right, the grandmother's daughter, has lost her close attachment to the church. But the grandmother is very concerned about her grandchild. And I told to the grandmother, I said, the principle for baptism in the church is we baptize adults who are prepared, and we baptize the children of faithful Orthodox Christians. There is no principle in any of the canons of the church that we baptize grandchildren. The reason we don't do that is because we have to have some confidence that after baptizing a child, the child will actually be raised as an Orthodox Christian. Baptism is not hocus pocus magic. It's miraculous, and miracles are not magic. And so this grandmother has been persistent, really persistent. Thank God. Thank God. I commended her. I commended her when I finally granted her a meeting this week. I said, you know what? Way to go. You broke down my door, basically. And I told her, I said, look, if you want to have a meeting with me, your daughter better come. So she brought her daughter. And we had a very profitable interaction. And we were discussing the importance of loving God, the importance of carrying on her faith, practicing it in the church as a precondition for baptism. I have lots of people in my church who became active Orthodox Christians for one reason. They had children, and I refused to baptize their children unless they came faithfully 4 Sundays in a row to church, something I have found out many of them had never done in their life. I convinced them to come 4 times. I said, we won't even talk about it until you come 4 times. After 4 times, you'll get me to sit down with you. Many people in my church, after coming 4 times, they find out it's so wonderful to come to church faithfully. You start to actually understand what's going on. And in fact, this is what I was presenting to this mother of the child. I said, look, let's do this. Let's do this. And then I found out the very sad reality. The very sad reality is that the mother, the father of the child, was not the mother's husband. They aren't married, not even civilly, and the child is illegitimate, which brings a whole nother layer of pastoral care that they need. They need to wed. They need to be prepared for being wed, etc. But this is the conditions in which we live. These are the conditions. At best, often we'll find a circumstance where people are getting married, but they're getting married in an empty, vacuous context in which they don't have a vision. It's as crazy as someone becoming a monk and having nothing to follow it. There is a culture, there is a tradition also of marriage. And that's what I'm going to speak to you about right now. What have the church traditionally thought about how to be a husband and how to be a wife and the significance of marriage? What have the church traditionally thought about that? Because cultivating that vision will provide the flesh on the body of marriage that you can pursue. It'll inspire a vision that you can pursue for all the years of your marriage, whether it's 2 years or 43. Marriage has been created by God as a miracle for us, as a path to salvation. It's the place where we learn to love others and not ourselves. Marriage is the place where we learn actually to escape from slavery to ego, where we learn actually to serve our neighbor, chiefly our spouse. Marriage is the place that we learn to acquire humility. I tell all the couples that I counsel, I said, look, I know that you think you know a lot about yourself. I said, but just wait till you're married. 6 months into it, you're going to have a completely different perspective on who you are. Because right now when you're dating, you take a shower before you go on dates. You brush your hair, right? If you stink, you fix that. I said, when you're married, that's done. That's done. I said, hopefully you'll still take care of yourself, maybe even better care of yourself now that you have someone who can actually cook for you if you're a man. When I was dating my wife, she was very concerned because I ate 2 things we got married young. We courted when we were 19. She came over to my apartment with my buddies and she found in the kitchen top ramen and bagels with cream cheese. That's pretty much all I ate. I ate bagels and cream cheese in the morning, and then I ate top ramen in the afternoon and at night. And when I had money, I ate better. And she changed my life. She changed my life for the better by taking care of me. We learn a lot about ourselves when we get married. And when that first child comes, you learn even more. Marriage provides an opportunity, built-in motivation to love your spouse and your own children, flesh from your flesh. The miracle of a child where St. John Chrysostom says the 2 become 1 and then they become 3. It's an incredible increase by decrease. God adds his grace and then we have 3, and that 3rd is a literal enfleshment of the 2. He has her eyes, his ears, his bill, her brains, whatever, right? But that child becomes the permanent, eternal witness to the union of this couple. So if that child will live forever, and that child will live forever as an expression of the love and union of the husband and the wife. When you have an interior motivation for your own children, you find yourself capable of doing things you never thought you could do. Like get up night after night after night with the sixth child at 1 o'clock in the morning and not be mad about it. Right? We learn to acquire and develop virtue. The cultivation of the virtues in the milieu of marriage is what marriage is all about. This is the stuff of why God fashioned marriage. If I had to say right out of the gate, if I had to summarize what are the miracles of marriage, I would say there's really three. Three divine purposes on why God has fashioned marriage. One is to spread his image, his glory, his magnificence over the entire world by the reproduction, what we call procreation of the human race. That's God's intent in childbearing. To raise a child today, to do it carefully, meaning in a Christian way, that doesn't just mean accepting the physical reality of the child. It means making sure that their inner reality, their souls are developed such that in soul and body, the image of God is clear. This is the means by which God's love, this is the means by which God's glory covers the whole earth as the waters cover the sea. Procreation is a massive task. It's not just union and gestation. It's forever. It's a long task of parenting. And we're still being parented if we admit it. Even if we are 50 years old and our children are raised, we know that the process of raising children is about you being raised too. That from God's perspective, you're just a little bit older child, taking care of some of his little bit younger children, all in the process of transformation. This is what procreation is. This is one of the key elements on why God fashioned marriage. Another is to create a beautiful friendship, what the church fathers call a sacred companionship on the road through the wilderness that we're wandering in to get into the promised land. When God fashioned Adam, even in paradise, he said it's not good for man to be alone. And he fashioned a helpmate suitable for him to fulfill the task that God had created. To be in the image of God means not to be by yourself any more than the Father would ever be by himself without his Son and his Holy Spirit. We are fashioned in the image of God to be communal persons, and that communion that God has ordained for most of us is the communion of marriage. It is the place, the means, the way by which we can get through the wilderness of this life into paradise. It's a sacred companionship and a deep friendship and a solution to loneliness, and the unity that is to be fashioned in marriage between the husband and the wife should proclaim to the world the union that God has with his people. That love that a husband and wife cultivate is a recommendation, ultimately, for the love and bond that God has with his people. Do you know the number one image used in all of the sacred scripture, Old and New Testament? The number one image for God's relationship to his people is marriage. God, the divine husband, the church, the bride of Christ, that unity that God has with us, which is a one flesh unity effected in the Eucharist, that is to be mirrored. That love and unity is to be mirrored in the sacred companionship, the friendship of Christian couples. And then the third, I would say, the third purpose in God's fashioning marriage is to provide a home, a hospital of therapy, a healing balm for man's disordered passions. We may get to this in the second afternoon session in the subject of how the wife particularly serves, in the words of the church fathers, as a potent healing charm or a divine drug for the husband's disorder. This is how the church fathers call it. Come on, guys, you know I'm not lying. You know I'm not lying. St. John Chrysostom says the man is like a small boat in the midst of the waves of life, and he's trying to keep his head above water, and his wife is that peaceful harbor where he finds the rest in her embrace. It's a beautiful vision. He calls the wife a pharmakon, a drug that heals, the divine antibiotic for the man. And of course, the man can provide that function also for the wife. But this is what was in Paul's mind when he wrote in 1 Corinthians 7, that because of fornication, because of disordered sexual passion, every man should have his own wife, and every wife should have her own husband. This is part of the miracle of healing our disorders and learning to combine our desires with love. Marriage provides that context to do that. So if I had to say, all of this has been by way of introduction to marriage. If I had to say why God made marriage, I say for those three reasons. For the propagation of his image, what we call procreation, for the formation of beautiful oneness and friendship that is the context through which you can make it through the wilderness of this life to paradise, to the promised land. And lastly, as a solution to our disorders, as a place in which healing and therapy can take place by having a bond that is not to be broken even when terrible mistakes are made. Marriage provides that context in which both husband and wife can say, forgive me, and I forgive you, and start anew every day. Every day. Okay. Father, am I allowed to interact at all with during the lecture, not just at the end?
Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions about my opening comments about marriage before I begin specifically about the role of husband? Okay. What I'd like to do in the rest of this initial lecture is to speak about the specific role of the husband. And I have to say now to the wives that are here, be nice. Be nice, because you're going to get yours this afternoon. Okay, so be nice. No elbows, no pokes. Okay, no dirty looks. Right? It's very good for both husband and wife to develop a good vision and to have the mutual encouragement and support of the spouse. My first affirmation about the particular role of the husband is that the husband is called to be the leader in the family, regardless of whether he feels himself to be a natural leader or not. There is, by virtue of the office of being a husband, a call to be a leader. And leadership presupposes vision. And without a vision to be a husband, marriage and family life is not going to develop as it should. So those three things that I've just suggested are purposes of marriage. The husband has to know these things. They have to be in his mind and in his heart as what he's attempting to accomplish in his own life and in his own family's life. If we're going to go somewhere, we have to make sure that where we're going is actually good and that it pleases God, or else we may end up being someplace we never wanted to be, simply by inattention, simply by not watching. If we let our marriages and our families just develop without purpose, without guidance, without some good leadership, we may find out that our marriages don't make it. St. John Chrysostom says that our life, and for most of the hour he was pastoring married couples and their children. He says our life is, quote, a wrestling school, a gymnasium. What an amazing thing. Your family is to be a gymnasium. A battle, don't we know it? A battle, a smelting furnace, and a dyer's house of virtue. A wrestling school, a gymnasium, a battle, a smelting furnace, and a dyer's house of virtue. Marriage is like that. It's an arena, it's a place of combat for the soul. Hopefully interior combat and not combat between the couples. And it's a kiln. It's the place where the image of God that's in us is made beautiful. You know, we know that we're fashioned in the image of God. This is the unique reality of being a human being and not a dog, as wonderful as dogs are. Human beings are made in the image of God. But that image is terribly tainted by our sins and by the fall of man. It's like an icon. You're a young church here, so you have new icons. But in old churches, if you go to some of our old churches, you're going to see, you can identify what were the icons that were in the church at the beginning. You know why? They're dark. They have soot from decades and decades and decades of candles burning in front of them. The icons have soot. They're not as brilliant. They're not as radiant. In fact, we hire artists to come and clean them and to very carefully, without damaging the icon, clean it. I remember once in 1997, I was on the Holy Mountain, and I was at a monastery called Vatopedi. Vatopedi is one of the 20 ruling monasteries of Mount Athos, and they have the earliest icon of St. Gregory Palamas. Gorgeous icon. When I saw it, he vested as a bishop, and he looked kind of like a 19th century Russian bishop in vestments. And I inquired about it, and I was told that's because the icon was painted by a 19th century Russian iconographer. But that was only the case in the top half of the icon, because in the bottom half of the icon, there was a whole nother set of vestments that depicted a much older form of vestment style. What was happening was this oldest icon in the world of St. Gregory Palamas, painted just after his death in the late 14th century, can you imagine, was being restored to its original condition. And it was taking a year. And the artist had covered the bottom half. And today, if you go to Vatopedi, you can see the whole icon as it originally was painted. Magnificent. That is your life. That is exactly your life. And that's what's taking place in marriage. The image that you are has been covered over with some sins. And the process of marriage is the process of purification, the renewal of the image. When you come out of the baptismal font, that image is bright. So bright, in fact, that St. John Chrysostom says the angels have to put sunglasses on. He actually doesn't say that. He says they have to divert their eyes. They must have had sunglasses in the 4th century, though. Kind of, maybe, I don't know. But that is how radiant the soul is. That's how brilliant the image is coming out of the baptismal font. You get dipped in that water, and you come out perfect. But then we have our life. And marriage helps us. Marriage provides that substance by which we can further clean and keep clean that image. This is a vision that we have to have. The good husband, therefore, should grasp his uniqueness as a husband. Just saying that is like heresy in our culture. What do you mean, saying that the husband should grant his uniqueness as a husband? There's equality. People are the same. Sex roles are outmoded. Many would have us think this. But in fact, sex roles are not outmoded. Sex roles are essential and non-negotiable, and even in a culture like ours that has been running at high speed since the 60s to try to erase any obvious distinction between a man and a woman. We've been in a unisex, androgynous craze for half a century. Even so, we're finding that our best efforts cannot erase the difference between a man and a woman. Even though our culture now is trying to convince us that every job should be open to women and every job should be open to men, that women should be firefighters. I always laugh at that. You know, I'm pretty tall and I weigh a lot, like 215 pounds. Sweetheart, do you think if you were a firefighter, my house is burning down, I'm stuck upstairs, if you came up with your ladder and you climbed up to my window, what would you do with me?
Try and pick you up.
You know what, let me tell you what would happen. I would say, sweetheart, what are you doing here? This is dangerous. And I'd pick you up, put you on my shoulder, and climb down your ladder. Because if you tried to pick me up, you could not. You could not. Any more than I could actually do the greatest work of conceiving a child. Even if science can somehow implant some sort of womb in men, and we can artificially create a zygote, implant it into the man's, he's not going to be a mother like a woman would be a mother. It's not going to happen. I have tried to be a great support to my wife through the birth and raising 10 kids. My oldest is 26. My youngest is 3. I stand amazed at what my wife is capable of doing, that I simply cannot do. I cannot get up in the middle of the night over and over and over without becoming a monster. As a matter of fact, I have a hard enough time not being a monster in general, but you add that to it. But my wife and so many women have such a deep God-implanted maternal instinct, such a bond with their children, that she is able to do things that men who don't have that simply can't do. I stand in awe and absolute wonder at that reality. Men and women are different. There's something about being a husband that is unique to the husband, and if he doesn't know what it is, how will he do it? There are certain things that he has to be responsible for that the wife is just not responsible for. The chief amongst them is to actually lead the family, to actually accept the name husband and the name father. You know, frankly, there is no greater name. I love it that as a priest, my people call me, as you do every priest. You call your priests father. This is God's name. I believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. To be called a father, we're unworthy. We're unworthy. Every Christian who says that, who calls their priest a father, is essentially saying, to this man, uniquely, I will grant liberty to talk to me about anything. That's really what we're saying when we call a priest father. He can ask me questions that I wouldn't let anybody ask me. I will talk with him about things I wouldn't talk with anyone else about. It's a tremendous dignity. And to be a father, to have the great honor of being called father in your own home, this is a high honor, tremendous dignity, and a lot goes with it. It means that we have to, as men, be willing to take ultimate responsibility for our families. Take ultimate responsibility. This doesn't mean that we take functional responsibility and we do everything. That's ridiculous. But what we do take is an assumption, a responsibility that everything that is happening and everything that's going to go on in my family, ultimately, I'm responsible for it. I'm going to oversee it. It's going to be a matter of my concern. Good husbands know how to unite their calling as men, their vocations as men, with their roles as husbands. This is what it means to be a leader. You know, when young men get the idea that women are really great, and it usually happens when they're, 12, 13, 14 years old, sometimes 15. I have a 15-year-old right now. And he has definitely discovered this. Yes, he's a sophomore in high school. And he has been expressing this in all sorts of interesting ways, wonderful ways. He's a great kid. But he's got the bug. Women are on his mind. Matter of fact, one particular woman's on his mind. And I laugh at him and I say to him, remembering my own life, when I was 15, I told my father, I said, Pops, I'm ready to get married. And he laughed at me. I just laughed at me. Didn't even say anything. He just laughed. That was the end of the conversation. There was nothing. He laughed. Anyway, I found out later the reason he laughed was because even though I had a job, which I thought was pretty cool, I was a gardener. I mowed our lawn, some other people's lawns. I was making some money. And I thought I was making some decent money. My dad was an investor, stockbroker. So I gave it to him and he did good with it. So I thought, wow, I'm ready to go. My father basically told me, son, maybe in a few years, if you keep up this work ethic, if you keep up thinking about work like this, you actually might. And I kept thinking, why is he talking about work so much? Why is he talking about that so much? I want to get married. I want to have a wife. But he said something to me that was very profound. And I later discovered it was absolutely scriptural. When God fashioned Adam, he gave him a commission. And then he gave him a wife. He gave Adam his job, and then he gave Adam his helper in the job. He told Adam that he wanted him to steward the whole earth. He wanted him to be fruitful and multiply, to fill the earth, to rule it and to subdue it, to be a priest and to offer the world to God. And then he made someone to be Adam's helpmate. How can a wife help a man? How can a woman help a man if the man has no idea what he's going to do? How can a woman help a man if the man doesn't know what he needs help in? And just think about the wide variety of vocations that a man could take. I was thinking recently about Melania Trump. Can you imagine? Your husband becomes the president? I mean, I can imagine not many wives would be necessarily too excited about that. To spend the rest of your life with security guards around you at all times, everywhere you went, having to calculate everything. You know, I know a lot of our presidents over the years have snuck out of the White House in disguise. I know that. And they go jogging and then they reveal it in their memoirs later, you know, how they used to sneak out with this or that security guard and no one recognized them. But what a life. What a life. A woman shouldn't have to be shocked by her husband's vocational choices. Can you imagine a couple's dating? They want to get married. The husband doesn't know what he wants to do. But then he decides, just as they get married, that he wants to be a military man and he wants to be a Navy seaman and he's going to be on a ship 8 months out of the year. Can just any old wife be without her husband for 8 months out of the year? Let's say that he decides he wants to be a priest. Can just any old woman decide, I'm going to be a priest's wife? No, there's a principle. And the principle is the good husband knows how to unite his vocation and his marriage. His calling from God is something that he should have clear in his head what he's supposed to do. What are his talents? How is he going to lay his life down in the public sphere, which is the sphere of men primarily? How should he do that before he finds his wife? Affection itself is not enough to get married. It takes more than that. A good husband also leads in the development or formation. He takes the initiative. That's what leaders do. Takes the initiative in development. Just think of how Jesus, the husband of the church, takes initiative. He took initiative to find us. You're in the middle of the Advent fast. You're going to climax your fasting with the celebration of the greatest miracle that the world has ever seen, the incarnation of the Son of God. Jesus, who has always been in the bosom of his Father, is going to become, he's going to assume something that he was not without ceasing to be what he was. He who has been God forever will become a man and will remain from that moment on both God and man as he remains today. Why did he do it? Why did he bend so low? Why did he traverse such a distance from heaven to earth? For one reason, because he was seeking a bride. He was seeking us, and that's what husbands do. It begins, of course, in courtship, but it continues throughout all of life, all of married life. The husband is the initiator. The husband, following this pattern, God's pattern, seeks the wife, not just in courtship, in betrothal, in marriage. The husband is developing this relationship. He leads in the cultivation of the marriage. He recognizes marriage is a plant to be properly cultivated. That's a beautiful image for marriage. It's an image also for the Christian. You know what we call a person when they're baptized, newly baptized? Neophyte, neophytos. Phytos is plant, neo is new. The new plants, you take care of the new plants carefully. When someone's got a new plant, they watch it all the time. They make sure that it's not getting too much sun or too much water. And if something grows there, the weeds, they pull them out of the new plant. That is exactly what a husband has to view, how a husband should view his marriage. It's something that, if neglected, will die. It needs nourishment. It needs care. It needs sunlight. The husband is leading in that cultivation. He leads in patience. He leads in spiritual life, in communication, in arrangement, in reconciliation, in love making. Oh, let me say something about that. One of the consequences of unisex culture is that male models and prototypes have been embraced, ironically, by the radical feminist movement as the way to define yourself. So a paycheck A paycheck is the definition of value in product or success. It's not the female model. It's not as though the feminists rose up and said, unless you can conceive, bear, and raise children, the most important task in the world. You know, C.S. Lewis, the great C.S. Lewis, 20th century apologist par excellence, says there's really only one job in life, and that's the job of the mom. Every other job exists to serve it. Indefensible truth. But it wasn't motherhood that was set up by the feminists as the model of significance. No. The feminists didn't convince the men to start wearing dresses, although some of us do. But the feminists adopted the pantsuit and the tie. They cut their hair, they worked in public, they stopped having children, stopped getting married in order that they can be equal. That's called, in many ways, not equality, that's called bondage, which is a very sad reality. The result of that is that the male style has become considered to be normative. And so a lot of men who have, in the words of the church fathers, a hotter flame, that's St. John Chrysostom's image for a man's sexual desire. He has a hotter flame, and the result is that men usually are the initiators. That's their role. But men, if they think that everyone's the same, can be very bothered by the fact that their wives don't initiate lovemaking with them. And they say, then they impose on their wife their mentality. They know that if they weren't interested in their wife, if they didn't initiate lovemaking, there would be a couple explanations. One is they're getting old, really old. Two, they've got someone on the side. Or three, they're just not attracted to their wife anymore. And then the man makes the unisex mistake of pushing that into his wife's mind, as though somehow, because she's not initiating, she must not be interested in him. She must not be attracted to him. She must have someone on the side. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that in confession from men. They're upset because their wives are not responding to them like they would be responding. What a terrible thing to wish. What a mistake. What a mistake. A wife's not initiating is no sign of her being uninterested in her husband. What it means is that she's a wife. What it means is that she's a woman. And she'll respond to her husband. Now, if the man takes care of himself and loves his wife and initiates lovemaking, and she says every time, I have a headache, okay, you got a problem here. You have a problem here. But the unisex model shouldn't be followed in this accord. The husbands are the leaders. The husbands are the initiators. They're the cultivators. The scripture actually calls it being the head. The head. Now, I know that is scary language today. Husband is the head of the wife, as the scripture says. The husband is the head of the family. My very first wedding I did. Of course, you hear the reading from Ephesians, from St. Paul's letter to the Ephesians, where he says just this. And he goes further, and he says that the husband should love the wife as Christ loves the church, and then that the husband should obey and submit to the husband if the church submits to Christ. After my very first wedding, one of the bridesmaids says to the bride, after the service is over, she says, my God, Father Josiah just made you your husband's slave. Not exactly. I laugh, though. I laugh because that is exactly the mind of the world. The mind of the world is that anyone, if you obey someone, you are a degraded slave. As though it's possible not to obey someone. Is it possible? You can say you're not obeying someone. What you're ultimately doing is obeying yourself, which is about the stupidest thing you can do. As the desert's fathers say, he who has himself as a spiritual father has a fool for a spiritual father. The last thing you want to do is obey yourself. You want to obey God. You want to obey those that are appointed by God to help nourish your soul. So that whole concept of obedience as somehow degrading servitude, we don't accept. We love obedience. If you don't love obedience, how do you understand Jesus' whole life? Jesus obeyed his Father in everything. Jesus said, I have come only to do the work the Father has given me. He went so far as to say, I have only spoken the words the Father has given me to speak. Can you imagine having an obedience so tight, so intense, that you wouldn't speak a word unless it was blessed? That is Jesus' entire life. Do we look at Jesus and say that he was some degraded slave? Or do we recognize that his obedience to his father was his glory? This was his majesty because of whom he was listening to and who he was following. For us, obedience is a beautiful thing. But headship means servitude to the other. We don't define the role of the husband as the head and the leader of his family as exercising authority, meaning that he has now a wife and children who do his will. Dream on. That's the world. Jesus said we don't govern. Remember when the disciples were fighting about who was the greatest? Jesus said to them, you want to be great? You become the slave of all. You want to be the top? You go down if you want to go up. And this is exactly what's the picture of a true marriage. How does a husband show his headship? A husband shows his headship by choosing to lead in being a servant, and choosing to lead to go down, and choosing what is the glory of a husband and a father, but to work himself to death, just like Christ did, to give his life for his wife and for his kids. This is the glory of a man. This is the glory of a husband. This is the glory of a father. And this is what it means to be a head. Even if your wife is more talented, even if she's smarter, even if she knows how to do lots of things, a head doesn't insist on having a fantasy about who he is. Oh, I know how to do better than my wife. A lot of us don't. There's tons of things my wife does better than myself. That doesn't make her my head. I'm the head. Function is something that differs in every single household based upon natural talents. The head is the one who has to recognize them. Bless and encourage the development of gifts and talents in the house while being the head. The first one to initiate and to lead in the family. This is the first and most important point that I'd like to make in the role of the husband. He can't be a limp wrist, a couch potato, someone who's just letting the family go. The husband is called by God to take an active leadership role because no one else can. No one else is called to be in his job. Doesn't mean micromanaging. Just think of it in the parish. Good parishes have strong priests and people who work. If you have a strong priest, but the people don't work and they want the priest to do anything, you have a dysfunctional parish. If you have a really active parish, but you have a priest who won't accept leadership, you have a dysfunctional parish. Healthy parishes are strong priests who do what only priests do. You know, when I was ordained, I remember the bishop told me something very beautiful, and it's informed 25 years of ministry for me. He told me, don't allow yourself to do, even if your people ask you to, anything that they can do. Wow. It completely altered my entire perspective. If you can do it, you should do it. Because you don't have a priest to do your stuff, right? You have a priest to do things that only a priest can do. Stand in front of the altar, perform the holy mysteries, serve you the body and blood of Christ, hear your confessions, help people die and go to paradise. These are the things that you want your priest to do, right? Just think of the Acts of the Apostles. When the apostles were confronted with the needs of the church, this is in Acts chapter 6, there were all sorts of practical needs. One group of widows were being overlooked in the distribution of daily alms. They came to the apostles and they said, you have to fix this. What did the apostles say? They said, we cannot neglect the word of God and prayer in order to attend to tables. Therefore, they appointed others to take care of it so that they could do what the leaders of the church had to do. This is the ecclesiastical image, but it works exactly the same in a home. There's only one head of the home, and that's the husband. The husband has to function as the head, but he should decide, he should make sure everyone's talents are being used. And that might even change over time. In my house, my wife and I have gone back and forth on who did the books, based upon who had time, who felt like doing it. Who cares? The important thing, from my husband's perspective, no late bills, no ruining our credit, making sure that we're not spending more than we have. These are basic things that every husband has to insist on. every husband has to be responsible for. Who does the practicalities? It depends. Now, in the last few minutes that I have, which is about how many, Phil?
3.
In the last 3 minutes,
You can take some more.
in the last 3 minutes that I have, let me just say a few other words about what are the roles of husbands. If he's the leader, I don't think that there's a more important role for a leader in the home than in the development of spiritual life. And this is perhaps the area where we men feel the least competent. And one of the reasons we feel the least competent to be spiritual leaders in the home is a lot of times our women are more spiritual than us. This is just the bottom line. A lot of men, we're in the world all the time. And forgive me, the world's a sticky place. And moms who are with their children and with other moms have a special blessing of being in a context that can be more nourishing. So it's sometimes hard for husbands to lead their wives because they know their wives are better Christians than them. Thankfully, in Holy Orthodoxy, we have men and women in church. You know that in both Roman Catholicism and Protestantism in America, mostly women are in church. The average congregation in the Roman Catholic Church, 70 million Roman Catholics in America, is 71% women. That's shocking. The feminization of Western forms of Christianity is intense. Thank God, Orthodoxy is very masculine, has a lot of appeal to men. I don't blame a lot of men who are in Protestant Catholic churches when the spirituality is very focused on kind of erotic language and, oh, Jesus, in my heart, I love you, you love me. But I mean, some of that's okay for us men, but too much of that, I mean, who'd want to go to church? I mean, it's uncomfortable for us. You come to Orthodoxy and you're like, wow, men feel like men and they're challenged to be men. So thank God our church has this. But it's very important for us, even if we recognize our wives are more spiritual, it's very important for us to exercise leadership. And I mean, practically speaking, this means overseeing family prayer. Doesn't mean that you have to do the praying. In my house, I pray with my kids every single night. I say one thing. That's it. This is what I say. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. My job is done. As soon as I say that, then the kids take over. And they say the prayers. This kid may have one prayer, and this child can say the Our Father, and this child can say that. My wife says some things. And that's it. So I'm not suggesting that the husband has to be the great prayer, the husband has to be, the great wise one. But he needs to oversee the fact that families are domestic churches, that there is spiritual life in a family. And this, of course, means that you pray, right? At meal times, you pray before you go to bed. It means that you make sure that you're staying close to the church. You make sure you get to church. You make sure that the family is participating, that you stay close, that you should know your priest and you should know your bishop. St. John Chrysostom says it's the honor in his beautiful book on raising kids. It's called On Vainglory and the Proper Upbringing of Children. He says, smart families, their kids are known by name to their priest. Their kids are known by name to their priest. This is something that a father should make sure happens. And of course, how are you going to do that? Except by yourself taking leadership and making sure your family gets to church. I call this being the domestic pastor. And there is so much history and example. The patriarchs in the Old Testament. Noah, who built an altar and prayed, led his family in prayer. Abraham, everywhere he moved, he built an altar and led his family in prayer. All the patriarchs. Job, read the prophecy of Job. Job got up and made a sacrifice every single morning. Do you know why? It says in the text, because he was worried that in some secret way, his kids had sinned against God. Can you imagine? He prayed for his kids. This is ancient. Family prayer is ancient. We're even given a teaching by Moses in the Pentateuch about fathers making sure that they teach the law to their children. Something to be done in the house. Being a domestic pastor, this is our calling. Making sure your house gets blessed. Yeah. Do you have your priest come to your house and bless it? You absolutely should. Even though we priests are way overworked And really, many of us, I have to confess, our bulletin just announced sign up for house blessings. Theophanies, January 6th. My secretary is very organized. She has a little sign-up sheet. She's trying to make it good for me, but she saw the look on my face when I saw it in the bulletin. I went white. I used to have an assistant priest. I don't have an assistant priest anymore. When he came, I said, Father, welcome to House Blessings. Enjoy your next month of life, because I won't be seeing you in the office. He's gone now, so it's back to me. But this is something that the good husband does. He makes sure of that beautiful connection between the church and the home that is expressed by having the priest come and bless the house after theophany. There's a lot more to be said. And there's lots of good resources. If you want to hear more about roles for the husband, another topic I love to talk about is provision. The husband, the good husband as a provider for his family. The good husband as a friend, something that we really need cultivation on. If you want to hear more about that, you can buy the lectures, because I have whole hour lectures on each of those on the Patristic Nectar website. It's a high calling to be a husband and a father to your family. I'll stop.
So Father, at this time, we'll take a 15-minute break. You can stretch, go to the bathroom, and then we'll continue again at 11:15 until 12:30. And during that time, you can expand more on the other topics, and then we'll do like a 30-minute Q&A before.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so we have time. So thank you, Father.
Where'd you get this?
It came with the church.
Yeah, it's fantastic. For a big context. They have big context for the normal size.
Oh, yeah.
So tell me how we're going to do this section. Do you want me to expand some more on the other points before Q&A?
Yeah,
Well, if we go to Q&A, I'm sure that they're going to be asking lots of questions.
I have a few webinar questions I'll ask you. Say, this person is asking this.
We have people on one.
Yeah, we have 40 that were registered, 13 that were and then it'll be recorded and it'll be sent to them so they can see. There's a correlation of posts. What's the next scene? So I think those
This is new. No one else is doing that. Maybe eventually they'll have a seminar or a webinar.
actually, that'd be good.
It is a tremendous use of digital power. I know you got your head
You're always more than welcome. We have like our house volunteers. We have like oh really? I used to have a Tempe marriage. How do you remember? You have so many people. Yeah. They started chanting. See what the different people out there,
I'm tired. I just gave up at the meeting. We got to stay on, but as soon as we got to stay on, which is the girl that started to write. So we took that out, and then bring the outfit, started to grow. So I have like
only if you want.
yeah, this is the best. This is it. Now the build. He said that it might be because it feels slowly done. He said maybe 6 months it might be 60. And so how are you? How far is it from here?
Although I'm online.
I know,
We had to do it. I'm at
I came in this room, she came in and turned up the I know the reason. I didn't pay that for the last 5 weeks.
So if I can get everyone's attention once again, if we can take our seats and come back to get settled for the next installment. So for this next installment from 11:15 until 12:30, Father Josiah will continue on the topic of the good husband, and then we'll have a 30-minute or so Q&A at the end. I've already had several questions asked on our webinar, so I'll ask the questions to you, Father, for the webinar participants, and then also we have your questions here from the audience as well. So you'll begin. You can just Q&A now.
Evidently, you all have been very bad, and your penance is to listen to me lectures some more. Sorry. Hold your questions because the time is coming. So I spoke a little bit about the husband as the domestic pastor. Mostly I spoke about the husband as the leader in the home. Inescapably, he has to assume that position. What I want to turn to now is a few more subjects. I want to talk to men about being a lover, and what exactly this means. I mentioned that in my first wedding, one of the bridesmaids responded poorly and misunderstood what a Christian means by embracing obedience, and especially the order and hierarchy of a home. What I could have told her if she'd actually said it to me and we'd had a conversation, I could have told her, I could have said, sweetheart, let's look at what we read, and then you tell me who has the harder task. The wife in being submissive to the husband as the church is submissive to Christ, or the husband who is asked to love his wife as Christ loved the church, and to lay his life down for her, and to see that he washes her with the water of the word so he can present her to God spotless and blameless. Who has the greater task? Any husband who has clean ears and no wax is built up and he can actually hear that, is flabbergasted at what St. Paul presents as the goal and task of the husband. The goal and task of the husband is to love your wife with a perfect love, with the love that was a love to the end, a sacrificial love that Christ offered the church. I don't know a single husband who does that. I am very, very far from doing that. That is an ideal higher than anything possible for a man. But this is what God's calling us to. This is how we should look, and we should view our wife's happiness as our happiness, our wife's sorrows as our sorrows, our wife's weaknesses as our weaknesses, to be borne and to be covered and to be strengthened. This is the call of the husband, is to love. And love seeks the benefit of the other. Love, by definition, is interested. Whatever you really love, you study. I have implanted in my mind my wife's face. I'm a terrible artist, so I would do her an injustice if I tried to sketch her face. But I could tell an artist how to make her face. Every aspect of it, like the shape of her forehead, what her ears look like, her eyes, because I love that face. And I have studied that face for almost 30 years. That's what love does. Love is interested. Love studies. Whatever you love, you study. You give your mind and your time to. And men are called to do that. Men are called to make their wives the object of their concerns. It's a high calling, and it's not the same as being in love with your wife. To love your wife and to be in love with her are two different things. One is a command, one is nice. But frankly, I fall in and out of love with my wife multiple times a day. That's my normal day. Now, that's maybe a commentary on me as much as it is on human life, but I fall in and out. When my wife brings me my morning coffee, I think she's the best. When the children are pounding down her door and she forgets that I'm even there, and I go to work without a lunch and without my morning coffee, I'm fit to be tied. What's wrong with that woman? Sadly, it's very important for us men to know that being in love and loving are not the same things. Affection is the humblest of earthly loves. St. John of Damascus, in his beautiful work on the Orthodox faith, he says that Jesus nowhere commands us to have affection for anyone, but he calls us to love everyone, even our enemies. Who has affection for enemies? It's irrelevant to your task. Your task is to love them, and love, remember, is measured by deeds. The most expansive text in the New Testament on love is in St. Paul's first epistle to the Corinthians, chapter 13, which you know well. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not rude, arrogant, or boastful. It endures all things, believes all things, hopes all things. Love never fails. If you look at the text, you'll notice that Paul describes love using action verbs, one after the other, after the other, after the other. Why? Because love is measured not in feeling, but in deed. That's why you can love your enemies. And your love of enemies is even more valuable than other loves because it's against your affection. It's against your feeling. You're not criticized by God when someone who has stabbed you in the back caused pain in your life. The Lord is not asking you or expecting you to have a wonderful feeling when you see that person. He's asking you to love them, to forgive them, to serve them, to better them like he did to us and continues to do to us. Love doesn't equal affection. There's no commandment about affection. You either have it or you don't. It's nice to have it. You should have chemistry in your marriage. My father used to always tell me that. Whenever I would tell him about I was interested in a new girl, he would always say to me, "Son, is there chemistry?" I knew what he was saying. You want to be able to make sure that there's chemistry. But besides having chemistry, by the way, our culture is way too interested in the chemist. The chemist rules America. Chemistry is nice, but love, commitment, deeds, even more important. It's a blessing to have affection, but affection often follows the deeds of love. It comes and goes, affection, in times that are rough and tumble in our fallen life. Being in love is really nice. Eros is very powerful. Erotic union, however, must be part of a total union in marriage, a union of love and service. C.S. Lewis, in his text, Mere Christianity, he says, "What we call being in love is a glorious state, and in several ways, it's good for us. It helps us to make us generous and courageous, and it opens our eyes not only to the beauty of the beloved, but to all beauty. And it subordinates, especially at first, our merely animal sexuality. In that sense, love is a great conqueror of lust. No one in his senses would deny that being in love is far better than either common sensuality or cold self-centeredness. But the most dangerous thing you can do is to take any one impulse of our nature and set it up as the thing you ought to follow at all costs. Being in love is a good thing, but it is not the best thing. There are many things below it, but there are also things above it. You cannot make it the basis of a whole life. It's a noble feeling, but still a feeling. Knowledge can last, principles can last, habits can last, but feelings come and go. Of course, ceasing to be in love need not mean ceasing to love, he says. Love in this second sense, love as distinct from being in love, is not merely a feeling, it's a deep unity, maintained by the will and deliberately strengthened by habit, reinforced in Christian marriages by the grace which both partakers ask and receive from God. Being in love first moved them to promise fidelity. This quieter love enables them to keep their promise. It's on this love that the engine of marriage is run. Being in love was the explosion that started it. What a beautiful conception of our life. We thank God for being in love when you are. And it's an explosion that starts the beautiful train that we know as marriage. But what keeps it running on the track is not the feeling, but the resolve of Christian love, the service of Christian love. Working hard to stay close, to cultivate your affection, to staying in love is also wise. And it's an art. It's absolutely an art. In fact, I would say it's an art that, to the detriment of many marriages, is not cultivated wisely by new couples. One of the things I require couples in pre-marriage counseling to commit to me, is that they will, after their marriage, continue to court like they did before their marriage. I make them promise that they will take time, one time a week, to be together what I would call a date night. They look at me, and I would say maybe 30 or 40% actually keep their word to me about it. And I know how I know, because those that don't are usually the ones that end up in the counseling office. They come and they why are they upset? And I ask them questions. Well, are you doing this? Are you taking care of yourself? Especially, this is a temptation when children come. Children are very needy, and they can easily take over a house if you allow them to take over a house. When I go and bless houses, I get to see things. And I know that it's not really how it is, because people clean their houses before priests. They do. They clean their houses, they put things away. Smart parents go into teenagers' room and even take things down. But because of this interaction, sometimes I can see when houses are dominated by kids. And every room has toys. And I shake my head. I said, no, absolutely not. Children are the fruit of married love. Married love is supreme. Without the embraces of the father and the mother, there are no children. And it's very important for the children not to be allowed to become central in the family. That is the way to develop an egoism that will never cease. They need to learn to take a second seat to their parents' love and to recognize it's their parents' love that created them. You know, of course, it's one thing to say that to a child. It's another to convince a child to be happy when the parents are going out on a date and the babysitter shows up. In my house, this is how it usually goes down. My date night's Monday night. I don't plan anything on Monday night. I plan a date. No church stuff unless it's a great feast like this coming Monday. The entrance of the Mother of God. But usually the little ones, they start going, oh, Poppy, are you going on a date? I don't want you to go on a date. And I usually, if I'm in the kitchen, this is usually where it happens. I pull their mother right over to me and I hug her. And then I look at them and I give her a big kiss. And I tickle her and I hold her and they go, oh, they don't want to watch, right? But they kind of do want to watch. They go, oh no, but then they peek out of their eye. And I tell them, I said, and I almost over and over and over again, I tell them, without this, no you. No this, no you, okay? And they get the picture. And I think what it does is cultivate in them a great appreciation for marriage, a great love for marriage. And they can endure being home with the babysitter and the other brothers and sisters without their parents for a few hours. But that cultivation, very, very important. The husband as the head of the house and as the lover should make sure that the marriage continues to be cultivated on the principles for which it was formed. Children didn't exist when the marriage was formed. They were the result of the embraces of love. And that union needs to be cultivated and kept alive, or else you will have the temptation when your children finally leave to end your marriage. This is why so many divorces happen after the children leave home, because the couple discovers that they've lost themselves in the raising of their children, and now that their children are gone, they don't have anything left to hold on to. The husband gives himself up like Christ gave himself up. The husband sacrifices for his wife, even to death. This is why no man, no husband would ever allow his wife or his daughters to die for him. This is why it's culturally insane to accept what 3 of our military chiefs have recommended to our nation, which is to institute the female draft in our nation. Can you imagine, those of you who have daughters, having your daughters drafted? When I saw that, I lost my mind. I preached a couple homilies against it, and I told my family, I told my daughters, I said, sweetheart, if that ever happened, if men have ever been gutted that much of what it means to be a man, a husband, and a father, that they would actually ask their daughter, not ask, they aren't asking. The draft does not ask. The draft demands that they would actually demand their young daughter to die for them so that they could be safe. I said, I will personally put you in the car and drive you to Canada. myself. We will relocate. What a disgrace. What a disgrace. Husbands following Christ lay their lives down for their wife and their children, which means that a husband's glory is to work really hard and to be tired. That's a glory for a husband, to be tired, to be exhausted. You know, when people come out of liturgy, if they haven't grown up in the Orthodox Church, one of the common things I hear in my parish, we have a lot of visitors and a lot of people who have become Orthodox over the years in our church. And they've told me a common theme: I'm tired. They go to a liturgy, they come out and they say, that was tiring. And I always look at them and I say, thank God. What great thing have you ever done in your life that doesn't make you tired? Just going to the gym for a half hour makes you tired. And what's the significance of that? A little tiny bit. You're going to go to church and not come out tired? You're doing the greatest work in the world, right? The liturgos, the work of the people. It's work. Your legs should be a little shaky, right? You should be exhausted. Your mind, from your careful attention, listening and praying, should be tired. Absolutely. It's a blessing to be tired, and it's a husband's blessing to be tired for his family. It's of the essence of chivalry. St. Paul also says that the husband, as the lover, should nourish and cherish his wife, taking care of her like what she is. King Solomon says that the wife is a treasure and a crown. How do you take care of your treasures and your crowns? You don't just leave them on the kitchen table, right? You adorn them and you care for them. This starts with a husband making sure that he doesn't starve his wife for affection. It means that a husband should not starve her for communication. We men have to work hard at setting aside a time to speak to our wives and to listen to our wives, even if we really aren't a talker or a listener. For their sake, we make sure that we ask the questions. Honey, how are you? How was your day? Anything bothering you? Is everything okay? This is what we do. We can learn this. We cherish our wives by valuing time with her, by giving her undistracted attention, even if it means turning the NFL off. Really, that's tough. Even if it means missing, the Clippers playing, if the wife needs to speak. Good husbands also love, as Christ loves to do, to clothe their wives with modesty and beauty, to make sure that their wives have access to healthy food, to take care of themselves, to exercise, to be with their own parents, to make sure that your wife can stay close to her own family if she still has family that are living, to make sure that you allow your wife to be with her own siblings and to really merge the families, which is one of the great beauties of why God created marriage. It's so that true bonds of love can actually be formed clan to clan, family to family. It's one of the reasons we do not marry our near relatives. We already have a bond of affection with our immediate family and our cousins. We don't marry our cousins because God wants us to build connections, bonds of love as tight as the family, with families that we have no natural relationship with. This is the way that love and unity spreads. We have to make sure that we help our spouses, our wives, continue this. My wife is the youngest of 6, and her relationship to her siblings is absolutely key to her happiness. I don't have to be as excited as she is about talking to them, but I am excited that she is talking to them and that she is close to them. A good husband should nourish his marriage always with an eye to the kingdom of God and to keep the kingdom of God in mind. When you get married, this is a central theme from the beginning of the wedding service. When you come to get crowned by the priest, the first thing he says is, blessed is the kingdom. And one of the last things he says, when he takes the crowns off your head, he says a beautiful prayer. And in the middle of that prayer, he turns with the crowns and he says, receive these crowns into thy kingdom, speaking to God. He takes the crowns of the couple and offers it to God and asks that that marriage might be established, that it might be related to the kingdom of God. This is what the good husband does. He keeps the kingdom in view. He seeks her development. Do you know the first steps that a married couple take? They're standing in front of the table, the wedding table. Let's imagine it's right there. Right in the middle of that table is the gospel book. The priest has just crowned them. A miracle has taken place. God has actually united them and made them one. And then the priest, having joined their hands together, which is one of the most ancient rites in the wedding service. This is as far back as Judaism goes. Priest extends his hand when he says in the prayer, O Lord, extend your hand from heaven and join this thy servant and this thy handmaid. He puts their hands together as a newly married couple, and then he dances with them. Their first steps are steps around the gospel book. They're not just steps around the gospel book, they're steps following their priest, with their kumbara, with their sponsors, in the presence of the church. What a magnificent proclamation about what marriage is. It's something that has at its heart and in its center Jesus himself, a fidelity to his words. You're saying our dance together, this dance that we're going to do together, is around Christ and his words. That's how central he is to this union. It's going to be with my priest. We're going to do this close to the church and those we love who are witnesses here before us and in the whole community of the church. That's life. That's Christian marriage. And a good husband keeps the connection between the marriage and ultimate things. Let me say a few words about being a provider. I love to scare the young man. I know I probably shouldn't love that because I'm a priest. I really shouldn't, but there's a lot of fun things about being a priest. And one of them is when the young man comes in and he wants to talk to the priest about getting married. Maybe he brings the girl in and they want a blessing on their engagement. And I usually say something like this. I said, before I agree to this, tell me, what's your plan? And I look at the young man. What's your plan to provide for your wife? That's what I ask him. That's followed up by a second question, which I'll tell you in a second. I only ask the second if the first goes bad. So I tell him, what's your plan? If he says to me this, then he gets a second question. If he says, well, I'm working and she's working. If that comes out of his mouth, that basically, we're going to make this because she's working and, I'm doing a little bit, I immediately get suspicious. And I get suspicious that when he means I'm working, he means I'm working at McDonald's. And I'm happy with that, even though I'm getting married. Unfortunately, jobs at McDonald's do not pay living wages these days. Maybe it's a good start job, but if you're going to get a wife and you're going to get children, you're going to have to get a lot more work than that. So then if he says that, I follow him up with a second question, and I say this. Do you play video games? If he says yes, that's the end of our conversation. Come back later when you haven't played them for a month. I'm not interested in talking to you. The husband is responsible to provide for his family. As hard as that is to hear. Yes, women can work. Yes, they can help. They might even make more than the husband, but it's not their responsibility. It's his. And to get that into the heads of young men these days, very challenging to do because we've invented being the wealthiest, richest country in the history of the human race. We've created a whole new stage of life called adolescence. All traditional societies went from childhood to adulthood. That's how traditional societies, not just Christian societies. We now have, beginning in the late 18th century, exploding in the 19th and coming to its horrible climax now. We have this thing called adolescence. Somehow you're not a child anymore and you want to be treated like an adult, but you don't want the responsibilities of an adult. And these days, especially with Obamacare, everybody was dancing. Now your kids can be on your policy till they're 26. Kyrie eleison. 100 times. They're not just going to be on your policy till they're 26. They're going to be in your house, eating your food. You know, when I grew up, wasn't that long ago, you wanted out at 18. You wanted out. And you knew it was going to be tough, but you can live with yourself. I mean, if you found out your friend was living at home with your parents, you're like, huh? What? Better to live on the park than at your home when you're with your parents when you're 25? Not anymore. Not anymore. We've lost this vision, the glory of providing for yourself, of what the scripture calls acting like a man. You know, that phrase is all over the scriptures. Act like a man. If there isn't a way to act like a man, how could Paul command it to be done? If we're all the same, he could have just easily said, act like a woman. But he didn't. He told the men, act like a man. 1 Corinthians 16:13. Be on the alert. Stand firm in the faith. Act like men and be strong. We men need to accept that providing and protecting is a calling from God for us. Initiation into manhood means giving up being mothered. The change from child to adult is a child loves to be taken care of. An adult man loves to take care. This is what it means to be a man. Men want to feed. Men want to support. Men want to protect. Men want to provide, not be provided for. I remember in my 20s, going out with my own dad after I was married and not wanting him to pay. No way, no way. Those days are over. A man has to give up being mothered in order to become a father. He can't seek the protection from his mother if he wants to become a protector. You have to graduate from that. No more depending on mom, but embracing danger. I remember as a little boy, I had to take the trash out. And a lot of times I would forget when the sun was up. And wow, was I sad when I forgot, because I was so afraid of taking the trash out in the dark. We had lots of raccoons in the area, and I was always wondering if I was going to have some confrontation with the raccoon when I was going out. And I remember even thinking to myself, I wonder why my father is not afraid of the dark. My dad had absolutely no fear of the dark, but for myself as a boy, I was afraid of the dark. And making that transition was a sign that I wasn't a boy anymore. Now, I was a young man. I could take the trash out, and I didn't care what was out there. I was afraid for what I would meet. I wasn't afraid of what would happen to me. I was afraid for what would happen to the thing I met. That raccoon was going down. I remember as a young man feeling that. This is a transition from being a child to being an adult, from being a boy to being a man. That transition has to take place in the realm of provision in order for a man to be a good husband. He has to accept, as hard as it is and as difficult as it is, he has to accept that his responsibility is to provide for his family. And a lot of times that's going to mean, especially in certain areas of the country and at certain ages, it's going to mean working a lot more than you'd want. Working a lot more than you want. That's just how it is. It's just how it is. And I'm not talking about providing. You don't hear me saying we have to provide a 5-star life. No, you have to provide food and shelter for your family. Exactly what that means, you have to decide with your own wife what your goals were. You know, I had I met a man when I was in college, deeply impacted me about the realm of provision. It was my favorite class in college. It was called Personal Financial Management. It was a class I took as a senior. It was an elective. And the man who taught it was a very successful banker, and he taught the class at the university for 1 penny a year. He insisted that he be paid because he wanted to say, I'm on the payroll, I'm faculty, but it was 1 penny. And he brought in a man, a very successful local businessman. This was in the city of Santa Barbara. Very successful local businessman who was now about 70 years old, and he had just retired. And he explained to me, to the whole class, that when he got married, he made an agreement with his wife about what they thought would be a reasonable standard of living. How should we live? And he told her, he said, sweetheart, imagine I made all the money in the world, what would you be content with? Even though we're not making much now, let's decide what we're going to be content with now, so that when the time comes, we don't, with our increasing income, increase what we say we need. It's a practice my late sister-in-law, who was a very, very successful multi-million-dollar a year attorney, she called it in her own life the golden handcuffs. Always in debt, no matter how much money she made, because with the increase of income came the increase in appetite. And what she and her husband thought they needed. So they were always in debt because they owned more and more things. This man who spoke to our class made a very wise decision. They made a decision together when they just got married, what they would be happy with, what kind of house, what kind of cars. He said when they began their marriage, they lived on 90% of his income and faithfully on principle gave 10% to the church. He said for the last 10 years of his life, that recipe, which had progressively been changing, was completely reversed. For 10 years, the couple had lived on 10% of their income and given 90% to their church. Can you imagine? The only way that could happen, the only way that they could produce that much charitable power in their resources was because they had made a decision up front about what was a reasonable lifestyle. And they didn't change it with income. They kept it, which means that they had a lot of resources that they could share. I'm not suggesting that men who are responsible to provide have to provide golden handcuffs, but basic provision, taking a roof for the family, nourishing food, the ability to raise the family that you want to. This is on the husband's shoulders. And a man who loves his wife, a man who is a good husband, have to have the courage to be able to say sometimes, no, we're going to live within our means. We're not going to spend more than we make. This is what the good husband does. He's a provider, which means that he functions in a manly capacity with regards to work. And he doesn't make his wife pay as though she isn't working. I always laugh when I meet someone new and they find out that my wife is a homemaker and they say, oh, your wife doesn't work. And I look at them and I thought to myself, my Lord, have you ever had a single child in your life? Can you imagine 10? 10 plus me, big headache. My mother lives with me for the last 15 years, and my wife homeschools and has homeschooled every single one of my children, as well as overseeing a 45-person school group at the church. Let me think, does my wife work? She works so much, I don't even know how. Kyrie eleison. This is what it means for us. We take pride in having a mean work ethic. That's what a good husband is. If you read the book of Proverbs, you'll see that in the book of Proverbs, the virtues are hymned. There's about 10 key virtues in the book of Proverbs. The first one or two, I don't have the exact numbers, but it's in the first one or two of the virtues that are hymned by King Solomon. Diligence. Blessing after blessing is promised to the person who lives a diligent life. And the good husband does that. Let me end my thoughts by making a comment about what does it mean to be a friend. If the good husband functions as his wife's friend, hopefully as her best friend. It's not always possible, it's not always the case. But that's what a husband should strive to do. Not just be a leader, not just be a domestic pastor, not just be a provider, not just be a lover, but be a true friend. It means to be a one-woman man. Do you know that this word is found in 1 Timothy on the list for being a priest, a bishop, or a deacon? You have to be a one-woman man. Now, sometimes in America, we misunderstand what it means to be monogamous. In America, we think monogamy means you're married to one woman at a time. You might have been married 6 times, but you were monogamous because you were married to one at a time, unlike perhaps the Muslims in some Muslim countries that are married to multiple women at the same time. That is not monogamy. In fact, monogamy means that you're married to one woman ever. Ever. And that is an image of God, because God is monogamous. He has one wife, one people, the church, not 2. This is a very important point to make to forms of Western Christianity in our country who think that the nation of Israel is together with the church, the people of God, even though they don't accept Christ. God does not have 2 wives. The nation of Israel was God's wife until they abandoned Christ and turned on him, and then Christ took the kingdom away from them and gave it to a country producing the fruit of it that we know as the church. The church has inherited all the promises that were made to ancient Israel have been inherited by the church, which is why Jesus established the church upon 12 apostles that fulfilled the 12 tribes of Israel. God has always had one wife and not 2. Fidelity is what it means to be a friend. It means staying true to your wife, which means that you have to give up. You have to give up the idea of abandonment. You have to be in for the long run. You have to be willing for enduring betrayals. You have to be willing to endure sad times because you're holding on for the long run. You're pledging yourself, we say in the service, you're pledging your trust, your covenant love forever, not for a little while. Fidelity is one of the key expressions of friendship. Preservation. Floods and heat and pressure can fracture love without God's help. But with God's help, you can endure tribulation and trial together, as we say, in sickness and in health. In good times and in bad, marriage endures. Infidelity crushes marriage, absolutely crushes marriage. And the good husband is a man who guards and protects against infidelity to his wife in every one of its forms. There's lots of ways to be unfaithful to your wife, not just the ultimate terrible way of embracing another woman, but infidelity can happen in many ways. Very few people today get married to the first person they have loved. That's just a statistical fact. What that means is that most marriages have potential exes many places. And there is a devil, so you should know the potential exes have the most inconvenient means of showing up by Facebook or some other way just when the couple doesn't need them to show up. Fidelity, which you pledge when you get crowned, is tested your whole life. And one of the ways it often gets tested is by the appearance of exes. Being wise, being a true friend means that you have to be very careful about the appearance of exes. What this can mean, practically speaking, is that you get a message on Facebook from an ex, you don't have to answer. There's no need to respond to it. If you do respond to it, be wise enough to tell your husband or your wife before you respond and ask them how they think you should respond. Don't have little tiny black holes in your life, areas that you're hiding from your spouse. If you have areas like that in your life that you're keeping your spouse out of, believe me, all sorts of corruption is going to grow in that darkness. Nasty mold, and it's going to cause a lot of stink. No, anything like that, make the decision together. Just treat your spouse as you would want to be treated. Right? This is the basic principle of love. Do unto others as you would have them do unto yourself. If it is your wife getting contacted by one of her exes, what would you want her to do? Would you not appreciate it if she told you right away? If she showed caution in responding and asked you, sweetheart, how do you think I should respond, if at all? I think you would deeply appreciate that. So we should do the same. Be careful how infidelity can appear. Infidelity in the church between couples really destroys the witness that the church provides to the world. If we divorce each other, if we become unfaithful to each other, where will the earthly picture be of God's faithful love? You are his hands. You are the light of the world, the salt of the earth. If the salt becomes tasteless, how are we going to preserve the corruption? We can't allow the spread of infidelity, which is so preponderant in our culture, as you saw recently in those who are competing to lead our country, where infidelity is the norm. If that becomes the norm in the church, our witness is gone. Absolutely gone. You do know that divorce is spiking in the church. You do know this, right? Just 50 years ago, almost unheard of in our churches. A tiny, tiny percentage. But now, divorce is very high. As a matter of fact, it's so high that many of our archdioceses, many of our jurisdictions don't even publish the statistics. That's not good. We should have those stats. As ugly as they might be, we should know what they are so that we can look at them and recognize what the disease is, right? Are you comforted if you feel a cancer growing in you, but you don't want to face it, so you just don't go to the doctor? Well, I haven't seen the x-ray, so I'm not worried about it, even though you feel it there, right? You know you have this big, massive lump in your chest. That's no solution. Infidelity is on the rise everywhere, and we have to keep a close watch lest it happen to us. We have to learn to be content with each other, not always seeking for more. Listen to this from Proverbs. It's a very beautiful text. It's all about sexual contentment. Drink water from your own cistern, flowing water from your own well. Should your springs be scattered abroad, streams of water in the streets? Let them be for yourself alone and not for strangers with you. Let your fountain be blessed. Rejoice in the wife of your youth, a lovely hind, a graceful doe. Let her breasts satisfy you at all times, and be infatuated always with her love. Why should you be infatuated, my son, with a loose woman, and embrace the bosom of an adulteress? For a man's ways are before the eyes of the Lord. This is the counsel of Solomon. Be content. Rejoice in your wife. Rejoice in your conjugal union. But be content. You don't have to seek illicit unions. And wow, is that not happening? You all heard of Ashley Madison? No. I'm glad, actually. But I see it's the wives who are going no. The question is, have men heard of Ashley Madison? Ashley Madison is an internet company that specializes in arranging adulterous liaisons. They were hacked last year. Hacked. And the result of the hack was that there were 33 million men's emails and personal information revealed. They all didn't come out in public, but numerous people in influential positions were forced to resign. Numerous pastors resigned. I had a buddy that I went to seminary with who had to step down from his position because when it was revealed, he was on the list together with hundreds of other pastors across the country. Can you imagine? Adultery is in the air with the great temptation of anonymity. Oh, you can do it. You can work these liaisons in your own computer and no one has to see. Didn't Solomon just say, the eyes of the Lord are everywhere? Nothing is hidden from his eyes. Going on a computer, and remember too, speaking to the brothers, St. Basil the Great says, eyes have hands. Eyes have hands. They're not these hands, but what you do with your eyes is a form of touching. To look at other women in this plague of pornography that we live in, this ocean of filth that's everywhere, I recognize how hard it is to escape. It's on billboards on our streets. It's dripping in the air. To be faithful to our wives, we cannot look. That is a form of touching. We don't do that. No man would want his wife looking at that filth of other men, and so no man should look at it. It's a very, very serious issue today. Do you know that 3 years ago, until 3 years ago, my whole priesthood, the number one cause of divorce in our nation was financial conflict. And so I spent a lot of time in premarital counseling, helping couples establish responsible financial wishes and desires so that they would not end up fighting about money and getting divorced. Do you know what took over 3 years ago? Number one cause of divorce in our land? Pornography. Pornography addiction. We need to be careful not to look, to be faithful, to be content, to stay true to our spouses, and not to allow distance to grow. You know, just because distance has grown between a couple doesn't mean that divorce is necessary. Just because hearts have grown cold doesn't mean that a marriage has to end. Just think of it from a Christian perspective. Think of those who once were very close to God and through circumstances unplanned, they found themselves, because of their lack of caution and their lack of care, they found themselves with a cold heart towards God. Does that mean that they should just chuck Christianity? Absolutely not. What does it mean that they should do? I'll tell you what you should do if you find yourself in that situation. Change your life. Jesus says this very beautifully when he appeared to John and gave him 7 letters. This is in the Revelation, in the Apocalypse, chapters 2 and 3. He dictated 7 letters to 7 churches. One of the churches was the church in Ephesus, a very esteemed church, a beautiful church. And in the letter, as in all the 7 letters, Jesus said something good about the church, then he said what he had concerns about the church, and then he issued a call to change, a call to repentance to the church. In the church of Ephesus, they were very strong. He commended them for being very strong, for testing false teachers, for holding to orthodoxy very, very closely. But he said this, I have one thing against you. You have left your first love. Therefore, he says, do repent and do the deeds that you did at first. That is not just profound counsel for Christians who have gotten cold-hearted towards God to go back and repent, put God back up where he belongs. It's great counsel to married couples. If we haven't been true, if we haven't been a faithful friend, and if our fidelity has been compromised, the thing to do is not to chuck it. Marriage ought not be chucked. The thing to do is to do the deeds that you did at first. Rekindle the love. Every person has fire put inside of them when they get baptized. God comes to live inside of you. You can cover that fire with the ash of coldness, and so you don't feel the warmth, but it doesn't mean the fire has gone away. It means that you need to blow that ash off for the fire to come to life again. Blow it off, let it rekindle, let it explode. It can happen not just in your relationship with God through repentance. Every time you go to confession, that's what we're doing. It can happen in marriage. Rather than letting infidelity and mistakes, cold-heartedness lead to the break of the marriage, rather make an alteration. Do something radical. Do something radical. Rekindle your love. Go back and start over and rebuild on a more solid foundation. Smart husbands can do that. They can lead that way to be faithful friends when they find themselves distant. So let me stop and ask if we can we go to questions, Q&A now? Let me have it.
So let's start with questions here from our audience. I have 3 so far online, but anyone have one? Please.
You've talked quite a bit about young men and having a plan before they get married.
Yeah.
And I've got a 16-year-old son who's focused. Would you suggest that he go to college, have a job, before he even thinks about getting married?
That's a wonderful question.
Can you repeat?
I'll repeat the question now. Since I've been emphasizing young men having jobs and vocations before they find their helpmate, how does that actually practically work itself out? Since most young men don't identify their task at least till the middle of college and sometimes later. In general, I would say this. Of absolute importance is that the man have made the move from childhood to adult with regards to his faith. to his religion, meaning that whether his parents go to church or not, he does. He's no longer relating to God through his parents. That's huge with regards to his faith. I would also say that he would also have to have become a man with regards to work, his whole work ethic. If he still is deeply interested in being cared for, being taken care of, I'd say he's definitely not ready. And therefore, we should cultivate this idea in our kids young. We should really help them by not allowing them to play as much as they do. Play is out of control. Entertainment. Some of you might have read the classic by Neil Postman, Amusing Ourselves to Death. It's a fantastic text. Amusing ourselves to death. Entertainment is absolutely out of control. Helping your children, helping a young man to get a job as soon as he can. Very, very important, so that he has responsibility. And then also working with them before they get out of high school on a plan with what they want to do with their life. The idea that all kids should go to college, let alone that it's a right to go to college, is nuts. Absolutely nuts. It's in fact redefining what college is. As soon as college becomes what everyone should do, then graduate school has become the new college. So what used to be significant by having a college degree, if everybody gets it, it means nothing. So now you have to go and get a master's degree. And then if that too many are getting that, you have to get a couple. Then you might have to get a PhD to do what? So this idea that you just go to college, and especially with the way that college is these days, it can just be extended adolescence. So I would work with your youngster to think while they're in high school, one of the best things that we can do is expose them to a wide perspective, expose them to what is possible. One of the great ways to do that is to get a text. I ask my children, I find out what they're interested in. For instance, my fifth son right now is a freshman at Berkeley. When he was a junior, it was clear to me he was really interested in history and politics. Those two things appeared to him to be very big. So I got him a book. I think it's called 100 Jobs for People Who Love History. Very simple, paperback. There's all sorts of books like it. But basically, it's something where, I mean, what does he know about what you can actually do with that, right? He needed to be exposed to that, and getting them exposed to that kind of thing is very important to help them decide, do they want to go to college or do they want to go to a trade right away? You know, in my land of origin, in England, all high school students in their third year get put on two tracks. One is the graduate and go into a trade track, and one is graduate and go to college track. But it's pretty much evenly split. We would really benefit in our nation by doing something like that, by helping the kids recognize going to college is not for everybody. And if you make it going for everybody, what you're really doing is changing what college is and making it less valuable. So helping them to identify that. We change jobs all the time, just like we change houses. So it's not like we need our kids to be in a job they're going to be in forever before they can get married, but to have a general idea. To have a general idea. And I think that they can get that by the time they're 20, 21, 22 years old, which I think is a pretty good time to get married. If I told you right now the age that the church fathers suggest kids get married, you'd all freak out. You would all freak out. Because it just doesn't, you could never imagine happening. St. John Chrysostom says 15. Kids should be married by 15. You know why? Because kids were adults at 12. Men were adult. They didn't have this whole thing. Today, 15, you're a sophomore in high school, you aren't driving, you don't probably have a job. It's crazy. It's crazy. So I would say maybe the comparable is 24. I don't know. 22 to 24 might be his 15. That'd be like a good hope. I got married when I was 20. My wife was 20, and it just about killed me. We were so happy to be married, but everyone mocked us and everyone criticized us. Oh, it's never going to last. And now who's left?
You talk about working today. Those that are working, especially young adults, maybe working one job or two jobs, which require 7 days a week, including Sunday. And also, those who have children, many times their sporting events are on Sunday for other events, okay? So how do you struggle with that?
It's a great question. Let me repeat it for those who are watching. In urban America, especially today, there's a growing decentralization of the Lord's Day and of Christian worship. And that's exacerbated by the outcropping of organized sports, which as a nation we worship, which now have the audacity to compete with Jesus Christ. Woe to the persons who do that. When I was born, I played sports my whole life. Never did we have a single practice or game on a Sunday. Unheard of. No parent would have tolerated it for a second. Now, with a very clear intent to de-Christianize the country, the whole globalist elite leadership of our country for the last 25 years has been purposely trying to redefine what our culture is and remove the taboos, the Christian taboos. I'm not certain that they're not coming back. I'm not certain. Because there's a lot about that whole movement that Americans are absolutely filthy disgusted with. And one of them is not being able to say Merry Christmas, not being able to not have Sunday be special when 75% of the country still, we are the most pluralist land in the world. We are the most religiously pluralist by the change of our immigration laws in the 60s. We have become the most religiously pluralist, but we are still a vast majority Christian nation. 75% self-identify as Christians in this country. So we've given up a lot. We have cooperated a lot. I fight this cats and dogs with my own parishioners. I said, look, if you are going to allow soccer over the Eucharist, just recognize what you are. You are an idol worshiper and you have no business here. It's that clear. Sunday is called the fourth commandment. Fourth commandment. I follow up my statement when their eyes are this big. I follow up my statement. I said, what other of the 10 commandments are you going to let your kids break in order to play sports? What if the coach says you have to sleep with the cheerleaders? Seventh commandment. Oh, you're going to do that? Oh, you have to lie in order to play on the football team. Oh, you're going to do that too? Why is it that we think we can take advantage of God, our Father, who's asking for some family time here? He's asking for family time. And forgive me, he's not asking. He's demanding. 6 days thou shalt labor. So I tell my look, work 6 days. Even if you have to work 14 hours, that's a lot of hours. 60, that's 84 hours, okay? 14 hours a day, 6 days a week, not 7. You work 7, you're going to crush yourself. You're going to get psychological problems. You're not going to have time with God and your family. The Lord's Day is sacred. It is sacred. And it was one of the first things that changed when the Roman Empire became Christian. One of the first things, when the bishops had the first opportunity to have a Christian emperor who would apply Christianity to society, Constantine made Sunday sacred and forbade work. That's how old it is. So we should not cooperate. 75, I heard one of the nice things I heard our president-elect say. I heard him giving a lecture once, and he said, it shocked him. He's not an observant Christian. He says he's a Presbyterian, but it's not like he's been a churchgoer. But he said something interestingly. He said, I've gone around and met all these pastors in the last 18 months as he was running for president. He goes, and I recognized, as he said, the Christian lobby in America is the biggest lobby possible. He goes, you should be able to dictate policy. He goes, but no one talks about the Christian lobby. We have all these little tiny minority groups telling the government how they should do things. He said if the Christians ever woke up and recognized that they could form a lobby themselves, it'd be over. And I'm like, exactly, we have cooperated with this. We have collaborated with this. Oh, you want me to come on Sunday? Well, okay. The parents on that team, probably if you have 15 families, 15 kids on the soccer team, at least 10 or 12 have a church. They should just go to the coach and say, excuse me, no. We really like the team, we really like you, but it's got to be some other time. We go to church on Sunday. Are you really asking me to become a practical atheist? Is that really what you're asking? in order to do this? Crazy days. Crazy days. We have to have a little more gumption, I think. A little more gumption. Put sports in its place. I love sports. My kids all play sports. Not Sundays. Not Sundays. And it's probably a little easier. You know what I told my kids to say? Even with their work, my kids I've always gotten them jobs when they're 14 or 15. Usually I find one of the restaurateurs in the church. I say, hey, can my son work for you? Anything, dishes, anything. Just get him out of the house. Get him working, you know, he's going to get some money in his pocket. You know, when you get money in your pocket, you start feeling, wow, you can do anything. Anyway, so I told my kids, I said, look, if you're in a job and they want you to work on Sunday, I always told my kids, I said, just tell them you already have a job, your dad's a pastor, and you're going to get fired if you're not there on Sunday morning. And it's worked every single time. Like, all right, your dad's a pastor. So they concede. But we're too compliant. Please.
How would you advise a young man seeking either to be clergy or the priesthood, but also providing for his family?
Oh, that's a sensitive question. If you want to serve the church and be a priest, and how do you provide? Well, that's tough. It's tough because in general, priests are not well provided for in our land. And many of them, it's a catch-22 because many of them have secular jobs just to provide for their family. And that really slows down the work of the church. If you want to build the church, you know, we're in a building moment here in this country. I mean, look where we are, right? We're in a new church. The quickest way to build the church is to free the pastor up actually to pastor and to lead the church in outreach. That's the quickest way to build the church. And the quickest way to stultify the church and to keep it from growing is to make sure your pastor's burdened by financial concerns. We're very wealthy people. Orthodox are the wealthiest of all religious denominations in America. The wealthiest and the most educated. Did you know that? The wealthiest and the most educated. We have the least universities and colleges, and we pay our priests terrible. There's something wrong with that. There's something wrong with that. We should definitely alter that. Thankfully, we have 2 Orthodox universities. We need a lot more. I was born and raised a Presbyterian. The Presbyterian Church is essentially the same size as far as adherents, about 1.5 million adherents in the Presbyterian Church, and about the same, about 1.5 million active Orthodox in America. The Presbyterians have 46 colleges and universities. We have 2. We have 2. So it's time, and a lot of that is that the Presbyterians didn't come to America to assimilate. Presbyterians were here in old America. I mean, a lot of the original colonies were functional congregational Presbyterian churches. So they didn't have to do anything to become American. A lot of our people came here and wanted to be more American than the Americans. So the idea of establishing uniquely Orthodox institutions wasn't in our mind. If you go to downtown LA, where I live, you can walk through the major hospitals and see wing after wing dedicated, completely funded by Orthodox benefactors. Because they thought, hey, I want to do something charitable. We have all this money. Let's give it to the hospital. And if you don't have bishops or priests out there saying, give me the money so that we can build this, it doesn't happen. But we are saying that now. We want your money. We want to build gorgeous churches. We want to build gorgeous churches that bear witness to God, and we want to build schools for our kids. We want to build unique Orthodox medical institutions where we can live actually our Christian faith out. So the day is changing. The day is changing. But anyone who wants to serve the church should recognize they're going to get riches elsewhere. And there, in my opinion, there's nothing more rich than being able to spend your life at the altar, spend your life with people loving God and worshiping Him. That's its own wealth.
Father, what's the appropriate Orthodox response to gay and lesbian marriage and just that lifestyle in general?
That's a great question.
For our kids and for adults.
That we're all asking. It's extremely, the question is what should be our response as Orthodox Christians to the rise of same-sex marriage and the LGBT movement in general, which is very active, extremely active in our land. And I would say this first, that these subjects, marriage and sexuality, are as old as human beings are. We have our faith given to us by God. It's a divine revelation. Faith does not change. We say at the end of every one of our Orthodox services, preserve, sometimes it's translated establish. Preserve, O Lord, the holy Orthodox faith and all Orthodox Christians unto ages of ages. Preserve. Our task is not to change the faith to accommodate passing winds. This new thing and that new thing. Now, our whole task is not to alter the faith at all, which was once for all given to us to keep and preserve and live. Our emphasis should be on living the faith, and we want everyone to do that. So we can't have any conversations about changing. President Obama a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, after he had changed, evolved, and then later admitted that he lied to the nation when he got elected a second time and said he still believed in traditional marriage, and then shortly after that said he didn't. First of all, no politician is allowed to change his moral commitments. You get elected based upon your moral commitments. If you change them, you should tell the people, hey, I'm not the same man that you elected. Sorry. People who change their moral commitments as adults are wimps. They're politicians. Who changes their moral commitments when they have them formed? You might not live up to them, but you don't change them because morals don't change. What is a moral? An eternally unchanging moral law. So this idea that morals evolve is just a complete nonsense. But then he went further, tragically much further. Not only did he change, but now he said, quote, religions that stigmatize same-sex relations must change their teachings. Secretary of State Clinton said the same thing. I didn't have any idea that politicians were theologians. Who would have known? But now they're propounding dogmatic truths. So that's laughable. We don't do that. We don't do that. But we do want every single person. I tell my parish all the time, I want every single gay man and I want every single lesbian woman a member of my church. I want them in my church. God loves them just like he loves me and you. We're all made for God. We all belong. That's where we belong. Now, I want them to come to the church like every other sinner in my parish, which means with a desire to love God and to leave their sins at the door. Of course, the church is very patient and tolerant because we are not very good at leaving our sins places. We take them with us wherever we go. But we don't come into the church and say, I'm an adulterer. You must recognize that. What? No. Adultery is a sin. So if you're gay and you're living in same-sex, erotic life, repent. No religion in the world has ever blessed that. Every single faith. Buddhism, Hinduism, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity all say same-sex erotic activity is degrading to the human person. It's never been believed as being edifying or helpful to a human person to live that way. And so because we love that community, we want them. And every one of our churches, we have gay people in them. I have at least 5 or 6 gay men in my church. But you wouldn't even know. Some are married. Some can't be married. But they are practicing, they're living faithfully. They love Christ. And that's a big cross. That's a big cross to carry if you have same-sex attraction. That's really fixed and you can't alter it. Some people can, some people can't. If you have that, that's a big cross and they need the support of the church for that. They need the support of the church for that. But the church can't say, degrade yourself. Just because something is in you doesn't mean that it's right. The community is very upset at us because we're saying to them, they think that you have to change. We are, but it's the same message we're saying to ourselves. I tell the people I talk to about homosexuality and lesbianism, I say, look, I don't have a man in my parish. I really think this is true. I don't have a man in my parish who wouldn't, like to be a polygamist sometimes. Not a single man. Men like women. And a lot of men look at women. And a lot of men lust for women. Because they have desire for many women, does that mean it's from God? No, we look at that desire and we say it's disordered. It's so disordered that Jesus said, if you look on a woman to lust for her, you've committed adultery with her in your heart. So we don't just say what's in you because it's in you is from God and you should live according to it. That violates our whole principles. We evaluate everything that's in us, all our desires, according to unchanging truth, standards. And lust, desire for many women, is not something that men should follow. They should be content with their wife. And in the same way, a person who has a desire for a person of the same sex should not live according to that. They should recognize it's a disorder, what Paul calls in Romans 1, an unnatural affection. But we have to remember that it's especially hard for people with that disposition because the married man at least has his wife. A person who is a homosexual person who has no sexual outlet at all. So they're going to have to live in a special way, close to God and close to the church. Frankly, for a long time, I've been encouraging men that are like that, who are pious, who really love God, to become monks. And I once got a letter from an abbot, very upset at what I was saying. And he said, "Father, why are you telling them to become monks?" I said, "Father," I said, "forgive me. I'm saying that because that's what the church has always said to them to do." And he said, "How so?" I said, "Look, if we tell the world there are two ways of salvation, marriage and monastic life, and a gay person can't marry, are you consigning them to nothingness? No, the reason that it's nice for a person who has same-sex attraction to go to a monastery is because a monastery is a community. So you need to live in community. You need to have friends. You need to have purpose. And it's so non-sexual. I mean, I'm like underdressed for a monastery, right? Monks, they're covered with hair all over the place, right? They've got clothes out the wazoo. They have very strict laws about interaction, right? This is just a place that a gay man who wants to be a faithful Christian could thrive in a community without the special temptations that you would have in the world. So on contraire, it is a natural place to go. And there are, even though this is like heresy to the movement, lots of people have been cured of this passion, just like lots of men have learned to be content with their wives and to be faithful. Lots. And some of them do marry and some of them have kids. It's not impossible. This idea that somehow I was born this way and it can't ever be changed, it's not true. Sometimes it can't be. I did an interview with a good friend who's a Protestant theologian and a gay man. His name is Wesley Hill, Dr. Wesley Hill. If you want to see his interview, it's on, if you go to YouTube and you look under Patristic Nectar Films, my company's films, it'll be there. And the reason I interviewed him was because he wrote a book called Washed and Waiting. Those are words from St. Paul, his teaching in 1 Corinthians 6, where he says something very powerful about this issue. He says, don't be deceived. Adulterers and murderers and homosexuals will not inherit the kingdom of God. And then he says in the next verse, and such were some of you, but you were washed, right? So he says those are serious sins that exclude someone from the kingdom of God. If you're going to kill someone, you're going to live an active homosexual life, you're going to be an adulterer, just recognize you are turning your back on salvation. But that doesn't stop you from the love of God. You can be washed from those things and become a full-fledged Christian person. That's what we offer for ourselves and for everyone. Please.
What's like a appropriate but right and also serious way though of explaining to children these types of serious sins and what their belief about it should be and how to live with these people since everything like that is common.
The question is, how do we teach young people, our children, about these sins and the things that they're going to see? It's a great question. And I would say, don't rush it. That's number one. Don't rush it. And children should allow it to be children without being scandalized, of having to see a lot of things that are really hard to see. The best thing that you can possibly give your children is a loving marriage. Give them the gift of a loving marriage and give them the gift of another brother and sister. Really, I encourage my people all the time to have more kids. I know it's super hard. I know firsthand. I've never known how I was going to be able to provide for my kids. Never. And God has only provided like when they came. My first son, I was so broke. I was in seminary, totally broke. And I had no idea. I didn't have any insurance. And it was back before there was some Obamacare and all that stuff. And my wife went to a women's retreat, a seminarian wives retreat, the night before her due date. And the doctor told her, it's no problem because it's your first baby. You're probably going to be in labor for 12 hours. She went and they were having a prayer. The ladies were holding each other's hands and praying about different things. And all of a sudden, her water broke. She had no idea. It was her first baby, right? You know, when you have your first baby, you're not really sure what that is. She thought she was just going to the bathroom on herself. And she said to her friend next door, she goes, oh, she's going to kill me for telling you this story. She says, can you go down there and smell that? What is that? Did I just pee on myself? And this girl, she leaves, she goes, no, it's not urine. It's not urine. She goes, oh my gosh, my water just broke. Anyway, baby was out in 45 minutes. Never even got out of the retreat center. Right there on a coffee table. Matter of fact, the ladies, the other seminarian wives, bought the coffee table, and we still have it in my son's bedroom. 26 years later. Anyway, so I wasn't even there. Eventually, we were in the South. We were in Mississippi, and it was a tornado. There was a tornado watch. So all the ambulances were busy. No ambulance could come. Matter of fact, my wife said the only person who showed up was an old fireman, and he didn't get there until the baby was almost out. And, you know, she was there, and the one lady was holding her leg at the ankle and another at the knee, and on the other side, one, they were the functional stirrups. And she said the old man came in. She said, of course, you know, she's so far along, all thoughts of modesty were like out the door. And she's like looking at the man, and she said he stood at the end of the table looking right at her with his hands up, with gloves on. He did nothing except stood there the whole time until the baby came out, I guess representing the fire department. And anyway, so she drives the baby, she drives my son, my new son, to the hospital where I'm waiting, not having really a clue much about anything. And I told her, I said, she was on the gurney and they were bringing her into the room. I said, sweetheart, thank you. You just saved me $3,000. Anyway, she looked at me. When the second one came, I told her, I said, sweetheart, can we do it the same way? So I don't know. Having kids, though, God provides. God provides. And it's better to be poor and yet to have a child. There's nothing as valuable as a human being. Do you know that the church fathers say that one human person is more valuable to God than the entire cosmos? One human being. That's St. Simeon, the new theologian. Really, so just think about that. And we had two at the time when we were in a Bible study with one of my professors in seminary after my second child was born. It was Christmas time. And we were talking about what we could have for get our kids for Christmas. And he said to me something. He said, you know what? The best Christmas gift we've ever given our kids is another brother and sister. It's absolutely true. You're wealthy. Even if you don't have the earth's wealth, but you have siblings, you have brothers and sisters who care about you, that love you, that keep in contact with you. Of course, you can have 10 kids, but if they hate each other, that's not great. But if you have a loving family, to have kids is great. And remember, when you get prayed for by the church, in the crowning service, the priest says in the prayer, "O Lord, grant that they might see their sons and their daughters." So I always tell them, I want at least 4. At least 4. 2 girls, 2 boys. Or else my prayer hasn't come true. You're asking me to pray for you at the crowning service, and we ask for plural.
Well, Father, and thank you very much for the questions. We're at 12:36. We're going to have lunch from 12:30 until 1:30. But I do have some webinar questions. I'd like to get the questions out. Maybe you can just quickly, forgive me, I don't want to slight the webinar people and not give full answers. But the first question is from Sandra. It says, this is regarding your first portion. It says, if this is a later marriage, is it okay to marry if the first, quote, reason for marriage to spread his image through procreation is not a possibility?
That's a great question. So the question is, about a late marriage, meaning that it's past the time, the possibility for procreation. Can you still get married? And the church would answer that yes. And there's lots of reasons for that, because though your time of procreation may be over, that's not always certain, as you know. Ask the patriarch Abraham, ask Saint Zacharias and Elizabeth, ask Joachim and Anna. All of them were way past the age of childbearing, and God granted them a miracle that we're all thankful for, the births of their incredible children. But even if that time is past, there are still central purposes of marriage that can be fulfilled, which is the companionship in the path through this wilderness of this life, friendship, and a solution for our own disorders. Those can still function. I would say, however, though, that one thing we don't want to imitate our culture with is not accepting the encroachment of death. For us, death is something that we should think about all the time, literally every day. The church fathers say no day can be lived well unless it's lived in the light of death, with us contemplating that it could be our last day. Which means that to start over again in an attempt to hold on to this fleeting life, to see people who have lived long in beautiful marriage, 40, 50 years, and then now they're 75, 80 years old, and then wanting to get married again, that is not something that the church thinks is a great idea. If they're widows or widowers, we wouldn't forbid it. The scriptures don't forbid it, but we wouldn't praise it, and we wouldn't encourage it. We'd say, why do that? Why do that? Spend your time now getting ready. That's different though if you're 40 or 50, right? Or 80. So you should take that into consideration. What is God's will? And if you've had failed marriages, eventually, if you've had multiple failed marriages, eventually you might want to ask the question, are you fit for marriage? Are you fit for marriage? In our culture, it's not unusual for people to get married 3, 4, 5 times. And my message as a pastor to folks in that situation is put 2 and 2 together here. You and marriage, they just do not work. They do not work. So forget about it.
Thank you, Father. The next question is from Laura. She says, during Q&A, can you please ask Father to talk shortly about blended families, roles of fathers, mothers, especially transition roles? So blended family.
Yes, that's a great question and an important question. The question is, what counsel can the church give about families that are blended? Meaning these are families that in which one or both parties were previously married and have children, and they've now entered into a second marriage in which a new family has arisen, in which there are half siblings. This is a big challenge, and those who are involved in it have to have a very flexible neck. In general, that's how we should be as Christians. Very flexible, right? Soft-necked, not stiff-necked like the Pharisees were. We should have a very soft neck. And we should not assume that by virtue of the choice that the parents have made, the man and the woman have made to enter into a second marriage, that this was agreed upon by the children. We should not assume that. There may be serious opposition on the part of the children, which means that they cannot just assume to expect to assume role as respected father or respected mother of the other children. That needs to be very carefully evaluated without force. It does have a lot of unique challenges too, especially if the children are teens. I can tell you pastorally, I have had numerous tragic episodes of blended families in which teens are united together and the couple expects them to understand that this is a new family, and they find themselves in what becomes incestuous sexual activity amongst the teens. It's happened over and over again in my pastoral experience, where parents are naive and they think that they can just get married to someone new who has comparable aged kids of the opposite sex, and that they can just move into the same house together and that that's going to be fine. That is a serious consideration to take into your reasoning process, because often kids at that age cannot make that mental change, and to live under the same house and to be going around the house like you would with a normal brother and sister is too much of a temptation for them to take. It's much easier if the children are very young than if the children are teens.
Thank you. Well, another question is from Father Nicholas. He says, can you explain more of how to tackle an ego in the marriage arena?
I wouldn't know anything about that. Ouch. I really don't think that either the husband or the wife have to imagine something grandiose about how to do that, because it is simply going to happen. You are going to find yourself immediately in multiple circumstances in which you are forced to make a decision to do what you want or to concede and to do what your spouse wants. And that is the measurement that you should make of your own love and your own spiritual life. Deferring, for instance, a husband and a father should only ever insist on a wish if it's moral. Every other request he should give in to. You sit down and what do we want to watch tonight? And the kids say, I want to watch Beauty and the Beast. And the dad's like, give me a break. He should say, all right. Or maybe he should say, all right, this time, but would it be all right if we watch the NFL next time? Something, right? Something. So most of the time, most of the decisions that we have to make as married couples and as parents, really the opportunity to grow is immense, because deferring out of love is such an available possibility all the time. What do you want to eat? Where do you want to go? These are not moral questions. So we can exercise the ability to deny ourselves, right? Which is the essence of following Christ, right? He said, no one can follow me unless he first denies himself, takes up his cross and follow me. So self-denial, which is the essence of Christian progress. This is why marriage and parenting is so rich. This is because it offers opportunity for self-denial everywhere you look. And I wouldn't say go try to make any new ones. Just be ready for the opportunities that God is going to present you in the normal stuff of family life, and take them. This is the way to kill the ego, to crucify the ego.
And the last question for you, Father, and then we'll wrap up and we'll go to lunch, is from Eleni. Eleni asks, how do you suggest single people to seek out spouses, especially those of us who are getting older? I'm almost 29 and still single. It is difficult to find strong Orthodox men.
Tell me about it. Tell me about it. Our culture, our Orthodox culture, our traditional culture is so good at this. So good. But we're not doing it. Our traditional culture knows on principle, you court to wed. You date to marry. This is the first thing I would say to any single person. If you're not ready to do business, don't start the fire, or you're going to be burned. Okay? If you're not ready to do business, don't get it going. I have my third child, my oldest daughter, is 22. She's so great. She's so great. She just finished college last year. She became an RN. She got her first job, like full-time job. I mean, she's worked since she was 14, but she got a full-time job at the hospital. She's working her rear off as a nurse. And we've had this tease going back and forth the last couple of years, because she had so many guys. They're like flies that need to be batted away every time she goes out in public. And I love to bat them. Back off. Anyway, but now, and she was so cooperative. She's so mature. She said she cooperated with me because she knew that she would get distracted and she wouldn't be able to finish. Nursing school was so hard on her. She knew that if she fell in love with a guy, if she let herself do that, she probably wasn't going to finish nursing school. So she did. She let me play my game without much opposition. But then when she graduated, a nice young man came to my office one day. He had come before, twice. The two previous times I sent him packing. I told him, I said, what, are you, my daughter? You? Ha! Anyway, and he said, well, he didn't get offended. He said, well, what would I need to do? I said, well, at least this. And I said, oh, wait, 6 months later, he came back. He said, I did that. I'm like, oh, dang. I said, well, what about this? And he's like, oh, really? I said, absolutely. I said, you think you're marrying into a priest family. Do you even know what that means, son? And he's like, what? I said, yeah, you're marrying into a priest family. You go home and figure that out. What does it marry? What's the difference between marrying a normal girl and marrying the daughter of a priest? And I threw all sorts of great Bible verses at him. Like in the Old Testament, there's a whole different, Moses gives a whole different like moral standard for daughters of priests. I'm serious. Yeah. So I quoted some of that and he's like, oh my gosh. I'm like, go study that and come back. Just hoping that he'd go away. Well, anyway, she finished, right? And so now she knew there's no more, Dad doesn't have any more defenses. And so she gave me a kind of the nod, like, you might be visited by so-and-so soon, Pops, and, I like him. I'm like, oh gosh. Came back a third time. He had done everything I asked. I finally just said, mea culpa. I cry uncle. And sure enough, they're having a very beautiful courtship, which I'm trying to accept. But that, I'm so proud of her because she did it the right way. And this is the way if to wed. Don't start if you can't do it. How do you start? One of the best ways to do it is to make sure that you follow Father Josiah's 12 rules of courtship, which I have online, by the way. If you want to get a free copy, all you have to go online, type in 12 rules of traditional courtship, and you'll find them. 1 through 12, right there. It's one of my favorite talks. How to do the dating thing right so that it ends up good. Our kids need a lot of help. They need a lot of help. And one of the ways that we help, one of the ways that we have done this traditionally is our families participate. It's not just a private decision. It's a family decision, which means that moms and dads and grandpas should be looking out. You should have your eyes out. And when you meet nice people, ask your son or daughter, hey, what about that person over there? They seem so nice. Who knows your kid better than you? Right? You know what they like, what they don't like, what might work, what might not work. Save them the hassle of like having to go through the whole Rolodex here. Give some suggestions. And here's something else you can do. What we call love feasts. This is how our people did it. Our parents or grandparents, or sometimes collaboration, sometimes whole villages, they would gather the young people together. They would have a really nice time. They might have some folk music. The priest would probably be there. Fun, enjoyable, healthy. I'll tell you what I've done in my house. I send out invitations. By the way, I'm giving you the skinny on how I became Dr. Love, okay? No one accepts my title except me. But I'm telling my kids, one day you're going to accept it. One day you're going to accept it. I've invited tons of kids. I send a letter to the boys. These are all the Orthodox churches in my area, like within an hour drive. There's a lot. And I sent them, I said, look, it's young people's night at my house. I said, if you want to come, you have one requirement. You have to send me a picture. You have to send me a picture and a short description of like what you want someone that you might be interested to know about. All the guys send them. I then take all the guys, 30, 35 of them. I mail them all to the girls. And then I take all the girls, same thing, and I mail them all to the guys. And then they come to my house. We have a great dinner. We talk. I usually have a priest come in and give a talk. Matter of fact, we're in Arizona. One of the best ones I ever did was Father Timothy Pavlatos. Do you know Father Timothy Pavlatos? Wow. He came 3 marriages within 3 months. Engagements. 3 engagements within 3 months after that. He came to give a great talk on love and relationships. Those are the kinds of things you have to do. Get involved. Get involved. If you don't want it to just go the normal way, which is that, you end up having 2 or 3 sexual partners, and then you end up marrying someone that maybe you don't even share your faith with, and you have a lot of troubles. If that doesn't seem so beautiful to you, then we should be much more proactive. Get some nice families in your parish to do the same thing. Host some love feasts where it's fun and they know what it's about, but hey, everybody's there. Eyes open. It's all dignified. Families are involved.
That's a really, really hard thing to tell a father, right? The love feast thing.
He's got 2 daughters.
Hey, you got to work with what you got. You got to work with what you got.
Father, it's interesting, you and Father Tim both have 10 children.
Oh my gosh. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. So it's 12:51 now, so we'll move over to the, actually I have a big favor to ask. We don't have enough chairs, so you have to take your chair over to the fellowship area. If you can, do that so you can have a chair for sitting, and then we'll begin.
Stop cheering when I first said
Thank you. I hope that,
Yeah, so I actually, yeah, I actually was. I'm gonna diffuse some thoughts before, you know, this becomes because I over-communicate. And then y'all are sure. So it's like something offensive. But I'm gonna share. Yeah.
there is a,
Yes. Yes, it's meant today, for the next week. Yes.
we saw me that this.
Okay, I forget, I'll get that to you. I'll get that to you.
I don't know what's wrong with me, but then I can kind of walk you, like, my wrong with my wrong. Yes.
Yeah, another one was, interesting, was,